To begin the meeting of the Metropolitan Council, it's Wednesday, October 9th, 2019, and I call the meeting to order. So how's everybody doing?
Good.
And it's pretty nice out there today, huh?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe our last one for a while, so I guess we have to savor it. Thank you for being here. Approval of the agenda. The first order of business is approval of the agenda. Can I have a motion and a second?
Vote to approve.
Second.
It's been moved by Cummings and seconded by Wolf. Motion to approve the agenda. Is there any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, the motion is adopted. Approval of minutes. The next order of business is an approval of the minutes from the September 25th meeting. Can I have a motion and a second to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved by Johnson and seconded by Zarin. Approval of the minutes. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, the motion is adopted. Public invitation? No. So, okay. At this time, anybody that would be interested could address the council on matters not on the agenda. So I understand from Liz there is nobody signed up. Okay, thank you. Next, we have the consent agenda items. These are enacted in one motion with no separate discussion generally. The first is item 2019-246. Is that Councilmember Barber? I'm trying to think how we do consent agendas. Just the consent agenda item. Okay, sorry. I've been at a training for the last 2 days, so okay. Is there a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved by Barber and seconded by Wolf. Approval of the consent agenda. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Reports of standing committees. Next, we will hear from the standing committees. Councilmember Lilligren, who I know just slipped in at the last minute, took his bus.
The bus was a little, there's traffic, so.
We're glad you're here.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, the Community Development Committee brings one item in our report. It's 2019-257. It's the City of Scandia Comprehensive Plan. Scandia is located in the northeast corner of Washington County on the St. Croix River, and Thrive designates Scandia as diversified rural and forecast growth of 400 new households in the community through 2040. The plan proposes to change the community designation for the village center within the central part of the city from diversified rural to rural center, and Scandia has no regional wastewater service planned. Council staff found that the city's 2040 plan conforms to regional systems plans, is consistent with the council policies and with the proposed amendments to the community designation, and is compatible with the plans of adjacent and affected jurisdictions. Madam Chair, I move that the Metropolitan Council adopt the attached advisory comments and review record and take the following actions. First, authorize the City of Scandia to place its 2040 comprehensive plan into effect. Also revise the community designation for the village center portion of Scandia, as shown in Figure 3, from diversified rural to rural center, and also to advise the city to implement the advisory comments in the review record for surface water management.
Thank you. There is a motion by Councilmember Lilligren on item 2019-257. Is there a second?
Second.
It's been seconded by Councilmember Gonzalez. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion carries. Next, we have the Environment Committee, Councilmember Lindstrom.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Excited to bring forward these grant recommendations regarding stormwater grant funding. And so we received 15 grant applications totaling over $1 million. And applications were reviewed and ranked by an internal and external panel. The rankings were reviewed by environmental service managers, and a final recommendation for funding was produced. The 3 highest scoring applications are recommended for full funding. The next 4 highest are recommended for partial funding. Recommendations are summarized in attachment A of the business item. Many parts of the metro area were developed before stormwater treatment was required. Often, the only opportunity to add stormwater treatment in these places is when properties are redeveloped. But these retrofits are frequently difficult due to site constraints. These grants help fund innovative projects to treat stormwater that could be replicated throughout the metro region. Projects funded by these grants will help to protect and improve water quality in the region. The grant applications recommended for funding are for redevelopment, retrofit projects that address untreated areas, support other council objectives, and can be replicated throughout the region. If any applicant declines partial funding, or if detailed project budgets vary from preliminary estimates resulting in unallocated funds, staff may reallocate those funds among recommended proposals or high-ranking unfunded proposals. Therefore, Madam Chair and members, I move that the Metropolitan Council authorize its regional administrator to award and execute the stormwater management grants recommended in attachment A of the business item in the total amount of $500,000.
Thank you. There's a motion by Councilmember Lindstrom for business item number 2019-267. Is there a second?
Second.
It's been seconded by Chambliss. Is there any further discussion? Councilmember Cummings.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a question, is there a time frame within which the funds have to be expended?
Councilmember Lindstrom.
That's a great question, and I'll ask Mr. Mulcahy to come up and address that question.
Mr. Mulcahy.
Madam Chair, council members, the grants have to be completed by December 31st, 2022, unless there are extreme extenuating circumstances.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other discussion? Okay. Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion passes. Thank you. Next, we have the Management Committee, and we'll have Councilmember Ferguson report.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is for business item 2019-262. It's authorization to enter into a labor agreement with the Law Enforcement Labor Services Local 203. The contract expired on December 31st, 2017. The labor agreement with the Law Enforcement Labor Services Local 223 represents 26 of our employees. On September 9, 2019, the Metropolitan Council received an interest arbitration decision establishing the terms and conditions of the employment for the contract effective January 1st, 2018 to December 31st, 2020. The arbitrator awarded the total economic package above the Management Committee's established parameters, but within the range the Council can manage and within the current operating budget. With that, I move that the Council authorize the Regional Administrator to enter into the labor agreement with the Law Enforcement Labor Services Local 203, supervisors, sergeants, and lieutenants effective January 1st, 2018 through December 31st, 2020.
Thank you. There's a motion by Councilmember Ferguson on business item 2019-262. Is there a second?
Second.
I think Councilmember Barber? I couldn't tell who it was. Councilmember Johnson. Second by Councilmember Johnson. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Transportation, I understand your reports are on consent.
Yes, Madam Chair.
And that brings us to the joint report of Environment and Community Development Committees. Councilmember Lilligren.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The following 6 business items are comprehensive plans for communities connected to the regional wastewater system. So they were heard in Community Development and Environment Committees. And for all 6, council staff found that the 2040 plans confirmed to regional systems plans are consistent with council policies and are compatible with the plans of adjacent and affected jurisdictions. So business item 2019-251 is the City of Tonka Bay 2040 Comprehensive Plan. I move that the Metropolitan Council adopt the attached advisory comments and review record and take the following actions. From Community Development Committee, authorize the City of Tonka Bay to place its 2040 Comprehensive Plan into effect and advise the city to implement the advisory comments in the review record for forecast, water resources, surface water management, and land use. And from the Environment Committee, approve the City of Tonka Bay's comprehensive sewer plan and require the city to submit to the council a copy of the final adopted ordinance that requires the disconnection of any identified prohibited discharges to the sanitary sewer system. System.
So there's a motion by Councilmember Lilligren on business item 2019-251. Is there a second?
Second.
It's been seconded by Councilmember Ferguson. Any further discussion? So you have 6 of these in a row, Councilmember, so.
No, I thought Councilmember Lindstrom was going to do them today.
Man,
Next
Well,
time.
you get all the glory.
All right, next time. We'll share.
We'll take the vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Next item.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's item 2019-252, the City of Mound 2040 Comprehensive Plan. Madam Chair, I move that the Metropolitan Council adopt the attached advisory comments and review record with the following actions from CD Committee. Authorize the City of Mound to place its 2040 Comprehensive Plan into effect. Also to revise the City of Mound's forecast upward as shown in Table 1 of the attached review record. And finally, to advise the city to implement the advisory comments in the review record for surface water management. And from the Environment Committee, approve the City of Mound's comprehensive plan. And also, if the city adopts a new private service lateral investigation and mediation ordinance, a copy of this ordinance needs to be submitted to the council upon adoption.
Okay. There's a motion by Councilmember Lilligren, business item 2019-252 JT. Is there a second?
Second?
Been seconded by Councilmember Ferguson. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion passes. Your next item.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's the City of Lauderdale 2040 Comprehensive Plan. Madam Chair, I move that the Metropolitan Council adopt the attached advisory comments and review record with the following actions from Community Development Committee. Authorize the City of Lauderdale to place its 2040 Comprehensive Plan into effect. Also to revise the City of Lauderdale's forecast upwards as shown in Table 1. And also to revise the affordable housing need allocation for the city to 64 units. From the Environment Committee, approve the City of Lauderdale's comprehensive sewer plan component of the city's 2040 comprehensive plan.
There's a motion by Councilmember Lilligren on business item 2019-253 JT. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Councilmember Lindstrom. Thank you. I knew that. I know Lauderdale's in your area, so
There is.
that was right. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion carries. Your next item.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's business item 2019-254. I move that the Metropolitan Council adopt the attached advisory comments and review record and take the following actions. From the Community Development Committee, authorize the City of Greenfield to place its 2040 comprehensive plan into effect. Also to revise the city's employment forecast upwards as shown in Table 1 and advise the city to implement the advisory comments in the review record for surface water management, forecasts, land use, and water supply. From the Environment Committee, approve the City of Greenfield's comprehensive sewer plan.
Thank you. There's a motion by Councilmember Lilligren, business item 2019-254 JT. Is there a second?
Second.
There's a second by Councilmember Johnson. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, thank you. Your next item.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Business item 2019-255, the City of Invergrove Heights 2040 Comprehensive Plan. I move that the Metropolitan Council adopt the attached advisory comments and review record and take the following actions. From Community Development Committee's recommendation, authorize the City of Invergrove Heights to place its 2040 comprehensive plan into effect. Advise the city to adopt an MRCCA plan within 60 days after receiving final DNR approval and submit a copy of the final adopted plan and evidence of adoption to the DNR Council and National Park Service within 10 days after the adoption. And recommendation from the Environment Committee, approve the City of Invergrove Heights Comprehensive Sewer Plan and require the city to submit to the council capacity and design flow information for its lift stations and each trunk sewer that connect to the regional system after completion of its evaluation of system capacity of its trunk system using protected design flow information. Implement the advisory comments in the review record for wastewater.
So there's a motion by Councilmember Lilligren on business item 2019-255 JT. Is there a second?
Second.
It's been seconded by Sterner. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, the motion passes. Thank you. Your last item.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's 2019-256. It's a City of Stillwater 2040 Comprehensive Plan. I move that the Metropolitan Council adopt the attached advisory comments and review record and take the following actions. Recommendations from the Community Development Committee authorize the City of Stillwater to place its 2040 comprehensive plan into effect. Also to revise the city's sewer service forecast downward as shown in Table 2. And finally, advise the city to implement the advisory comments in the review record for transit. And from the Environment Committee to approve the City of Stillwater's comprehensive sewer plan.
Okay, there's a motion by Councilmember Lilligren, business item 2019-256 JT. There a second?
Second.
It's been seconded by Gonzalez. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. All right, nice job.
Thanks.
Other business, which brings us to business item 2019-276, the Minneapolis Bus Garage rejection of bids for construction contract 19P000. Councilmember Barber.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, council members, business item number 2019-276 is the Minneapolis Bus Garage construction contract. In May 29th, the council issued an invitation for bids on this project. 5 bids were received. In mid-September, the low bidder filed a lawsuit against the council challenging staff's determination that the bidder did not make a good faith effort to meet the 15% DBE goal for the project. The low bidder dismissed the lawsuit when it learned council staff would recommend that the council rebid the project. As indicated in the business item, the project will be rebid with some changes to the scope and clarifications to the DBE requirements. It is anticipated that a contract under a resolicitation will be awarded in January 2020. Therefore, Madam Chair, I move that the Metropolitan Council, 1, reject all bids received for construction of the Minneapolis Bus Garage Haywood Expansion Electric Bus Infrastructure Project number 62312, and 2, authorize council staff to resolicit bids for the project.
Okay, there's a motion by Barber on 2019-276. Is there a second?
Second.
It's been seconded by Councilmember Chambliss. Is there any further discussion? Okay, seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion passes. Thank you. Next, we have item number, well, I have an information item, which is the Center for Economic Inclusion. So Tawana Black, and I think she here, maybe we went quicker than we thought. And how about, do we have the ability, is Tawana here? Well, we know traffic's bad too, so maybe what we should do is we'll go ahead and then go to information item, the 2020 through 2025 capital program. Marie Henderson, or Mary? Welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Give them a minute to put the presentation up. So, council members, today we are taking the next step in our annual budget development. In August, you heard and adopted the preliminary operating budget of $1.2 billion and set a ceiling on our property tax levy at $88.7 million, which is about a 2% increase. Today, we are here before you to present the 2020 through 2025 capital program. So the capital program is a little bit different than the operating budget. It's a 6-year plan that's more of a living document. We don't start over from scratch each year in the capital project, out with the old and in with the new. Instead, we have projects that are added to and closed out of the capital program through the council's amendment process. So next council meeting, you will hear our third quarter budget amendment, which will propose changes to individual projects for the council approval. Those proposed changes are incorporated into the presentation that we are giving you today. The 2020 through 2025 capital program proposed today and then brought to you on October 23rd. As a part of that third quarter amendment, it will be incorporated into our unified budget, so operating and capital, for public comment. And once adopted, our public comment period remains open until we adopt the budget, the final budget, on December 11th. So our capital program has 3 essential parts. The ACP, or the authorized capital program, includes projects or phases of projects where the funding has been secured and the council has given final approval to spend. Then we have the annual spending plan, and that's what we call the capital budget. That's the dollar amount in the ACP that we plan to spend in the upcoming year. And then finally, we have our CIP, or capital improvement plan. And that's a 6-year plan of projects where the funding sources have been identified, but they have not yet been secured, and the council therefore has not given its final approval to move forward and spend on those projects. So while the capital program is indeed a big list of projects, today our focus is not going to be on the individual projects within the program, but on the notable events or notable changes to the program. And while we won't dig into the details of each of the projects in the capital program, remember that the council acts on each and every project as it comes forward from planned into the authorized capital program. So you still see those projects as they move forward. So our total capital program, 2020 to 2025, is $8.1 billion. So that's an increase from $7.6 billion at this time last year, or about a 7% increase. By comparison, the total capital program in 2010 was $3.1 billion. So what's the big difference? That pie chart on the left side shows our transit way projects, the light blue there. So that is our federal new starts and small starts projects. And the big light rail projects really have consumed a large part of our capital program. Oh, let's go back a little bit. So the middle program there shows the uses of our capital program by category. And as we look at that red piece there, that's expansion. And again, the transitway projects are a big part of that expansion. If we were to take those, just the Southwest and Bottineau plant light rail projects out of those uses, over 60% of our budget would be focused on preservation. And that's really the story of our capital program. It's preservation, but for those transitway projects. And then on the right side of the pie charts there, that last chart, that shows where our funding for the capital program comes from. 78% of our funding is devoted to transit and transitways, and primarily that comes from the federal government, state and local grants, as well as our regional bonds. Our wastewater system is primarily funded with the regional wastewater bonds that we issue here at the council, and then our park system receives state funds, and we also have the ability to issue regional bonds for our park system as well. This next slide shows our breakout of our capital program by our funding status for that, planned versus authorized. Our capital program includes $3.6 million of authorized projects. Those are shown on both of the blue pieces of the pie segments. These are projects, again, for which funding has been secured and spending has been approved by the council. But because the ACP includes projects that are multi-year projects, a lot of that budget has already been spent. So projects stay in the authorized capital program until they're completed and closed. And so of the amount in the authorized capital program, 69% of the ACP has already been spent. So this shows planned, we have 4.4 and then 3.6 million in the authorized capital program. Next slide shows our future spending. So I just break out that piece in the authorized capital program, 1.1 billion that has not yet been spent. So 1.1 billion in the authorized capital program, and then a plan, all of the plan, of course, has not been spent, $4.5 billion. For 2020, we anticipate spending $443 million on projects that are currently authorized in the capital program. Again, as we secure additional funding, hopefully through an FFGA, we will amend the capital program and move from planned into authorized, those things for which we secure additional funding for. So again, a point-in-time budget is what we adopt with the Unified Capital Program, but this is a living document that changes as we amend projects in as we get funding secured. So with that, that's just kind of an overall of the entire budget, and I'm going to transition to the departments to talk a little bit about the stories of their capital program, and I promise this is shorter than the operating budget presentation.
Welcome to the council.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the council. My name is Ned Smith. I am the Director of Finance for Met Council Environmental Services, and I am joined with.
I'm Janine Clancy. I'm the Assistant General Manager for Technical Services.
So we'll be walking through at a high level what our capital program is for the next 6 years. At a high level, we are looking for $1.39 billion for our capital program. In terms of by department, we break that down into thinking about interceptors versus the treatment plants, because those are the two primary pieces of capital. You can see that we are, those of you who have been on the council for a while can see we are increasing our spending in treatment plants as we're balancing out more around our solids capacity, and Janine will talk to that in more detail. In terms of uses by category, we have preserve, that's the preservation of our assets. As some of you, in fact, as we learned last night in Environment Committee, we have a pipe from 1894 that we're doing some work on. So we occasionally bump into an old pipe that needs some additional work. In addition, our plant, our Metro plant was built back in the 30s. So preserve is mostly on rehabilitation to make sure everything is up to performance expectations. It also has to do with, in the last 10 years, we've been doing a lot of inspection work on our interceptors, and that has provided us some additional guidance on rehabilitation opportunities. Expand is not necessarily around increasing a footprint of a plant per se. That's around two things. Either one, expanding the capacity of our interceptor system. If we are running a pipe out to a new customer, that would be an expand. And then if we were also, you can increase the capacity of a plant without increasing its footprint. And that's primarily around, again, the solids work that Janine will be talking about. And then improving is improvements to the overall system. That can be around odor control. It can be around safety enhancements, regulatory requirements, and also increasing our energy efficiency. So that's an investment that makes our system better, not necessarily bigger. In terms of our funding sources, we're almost entirely funded by our regional bonding. So we are very proud of our AAA rating, which keeps our interest rates very low. We use 20-year fixed debt, and we usually do about $100 million a year in offerings. In fact, our next offering is anticipated in March or April of 2020. PAYGO is our other major source. That's pay-as-you-go. So that's where we use operating funds for capital projects that would have otherwise been financed. And we enjoy a good deal of savings for every million that we put out. We save about $400,000 in interest expense. So that's a great way for us to keep our rates low. And then state, we get funds from the state PFA, the Public Facilities Authority, and that is a pass-through of SRF funds, state revolving funds, which come from the federal government. And that is a inter-subsidy program. So we generally get about 150 to 175 basis points discount from the state. So our interest rates there are generally around 1.5 to 1 3/4. So we get some great interest savings there. The number is actually a little bit bigger. We usually anticipate around 45 to 50 million per year in state SRF or PFA funds, but that only gets authorized 1 year at a time. So we don't want to count our chickens before they're hatched, so to speak, but that is what that state funding is. In terms of the future spend, this looks very similar. This, as Mary discussed earlier, this breaks out within the authorized group, backing out money that's already been spent on a project. So if you think about a $20 million interceptor project, the ACP would show 20 million. If we have spent 5 million on that, then future spending would only show 15. So this is just the balance that shows where we have spent the money and then what is planned. But the mix looks very similar in terms of treatment and interceptor, again, as we're shifting more of our investments in our plants that Janine will talk through.
Okay, so the next slide talks about our modifications to the program. And just as a reminder, we have 9 wastewater treatment plants in our portfolio and a collection system that includes over 600 miles of interceptor pipe, 60 pump stations, and many of those are very large pump stations, and 200 metering stations. Our capital improvement program is a critical element in meeting the MCES customer level of service, which is in fact the expectations of the 110 communities that we serve in the region. So Last year, this slide notes that we will continue to invest in solids management at our facilities. So last year, the council approved construction of $21 million of improvements at our Seneca wastewater treatment facility in Eagan. This project improves our incineration facilities to meet reduced emissions requirements. The project is currently underway and is included in our program. In the next few weeks, the council will be asked to authorize construction of phase 1 of the Empire wastewater treatment solids improvements, which will address biosolids pad capacity constraints and renew the existing boiler system. And then later this year, the council will be asked to authorize improvements to our solids management building at the Metropolitan plant. And we will also request authorization to enter into a professional services contract for owner's agent to represent the council on the design build contracts for the 4th incinerator and the services building. And you'll see that project appear throughout this presentation as it's it's a $180 million project that's in our portfolio. So on the other side of the slide, we have adjusted our program to advance work in the Brooklyn Park area, which the council will consider next week. And we're wrapping up our work in the city of Champlin. We've also reduced funding and noted as the Southeast Metro Water Reclamation Facility. This is in recognition of ENERCOM's decision not to invest in Minnesota, but rather to build their waste-to-energy facility in California. So ES continues to receive inquiries from communities about the opportunity to partner on wastewater reuse. And if there's a development project that's identified in the future, we'll see this project back in the program. And then finally on this slide, in the Blue Lake service area, we will complete yet another major interceptor project in the Mound and Minnetrista communities in 2020. And the program will be adjusted to reflect that progress. Okay. So we break our projects into wastewater treatment plants as well as the interceptor system. On the plant side, in addition to solids processing at the Metro plant, we are also working on a project that would renew the air distribution systems for our secondary treatment at the Metro plant. I previously spoke about solids processing. And then we acquired the Rogers wastewater treatment plant in July of 2019. And while this plant was very well taken care of by the city of Rogers, there is a need to do some work that will bring the plant to ES standards and will provide some accommodations that are basic to our staff that are needed there. Currently, the Rogers staff was using Rogers Public Works facilities, so we need to have some separate facilities for our own staff. On the other side of the slide, you see the solids processing again, but you also see then the Hastings plant. We will begin the process to perform a condition assessment of the Hastings wastewater treatment plant. This plant was built in 1952, and the council has acquired a site to build a new plant. We need to evaluate the condition of the existing facility, do a financial analysis, and then determine what our next steps are. And then you also see the Blue Lake plant. We produce and market a fertilizer pellet from our biosolids at the Blue Lake plant. We have one dryer facility and it's 20 years old. So we have a project planned to renew the facility. And then finally on that slide, we have the Crow River plant. This is in conjunction with the City of Rogers. So the commitment to the City of Rogers is that we will have a new treatment plant commissioned by 2030. And this plant will serve Rogers portions of Corcoran as well as Dayton. And then on the interceptor side, we plan to complete switching to the interceptor program, we have dovetailing into the Crow River plant planning. We also need to initiate a study of our interceptor improvements needed in the northwest area of the region to serve growth. And this would also potentially divert flow from the existing Elm Creek interceptor, which would preserve capacity for growth in the Metro plant service area. And then we have purchased a property in Fridley in order to replace a large 20 million gallon per day lift station in Brooklyn Park. We plan to complete work in the Hopkins system that was started over 10 years ago. So when Mary mentions many of these projects take many years, a decade in some cases. And we are working hand in hand with the city of Minneapolis in the timing and the scope of the East Isles Force Main Replacement Project. We have facilities in Battle Creek located in St. Paul, Battle Creek Park in St. Paul that are in need of renewal. And the council will see that construction project in 2020. And then L24 is a lift station in St. Bonifacius that is in need of renewal that you'll also see in 2020. So on the other side of the slide, our planned improvements have been identified as the Minneapolis Interceptor Improvements Phase 2. We'll start our project planning and prioritization based on condition assessment, and then a very large joint study that we're working on with the city of Minneapolis to identify capacity needs. Secondly, we have the Blue Lake system improvements where we're working on capacity assessment as well as condition assessment and then determining the next course of action in the Lake Minnetonka area. So you'll see a facility plan in late 2020 for consideration. And then finally, the St. Paul interceptor improvements. We have a large interceptor that runs down I-94. MnDOT is reimagining that highway. We are at the table to determine what's in the best interest of the council for our wastewater facilities in that area. We are also working on cooperatively with our stakeholders on preserving the location of our liquid waste receiving facilities at 3rd and Commercial. And then finally, we're undertaking a very large condition assessment program in the St. Paul interceptor system that will identify our future needs.
Okay, good, great presentation. Are there any questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Always amazed how much you all are doing and how much is needed, right, all the time. Next we have transit. Welcome to the council.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair, committee members, Ed Petrie, Metro Transit Finance.
And Heather Augustin-Hebner, MTS Finance. All right, so the overall transit capital program is $6.3 billion, which includes currently authorized and future planned projects. When we look at the capital program by uses, 71% of the capital program is transitways, as Mary mentioned earlier this evening. This includes the Metro Blue and Green Line extensions. The next largest category is fleet replacement. Uses by category is again weighted heavily for the transitways, with 77% of funding 77% of funding goes towards expansion and 23% towards preservation of our current system. When we look at our revenue, 47% comes from federal sources, which anticipates full funding agreements for the Metro Blue and Green Line extensions. Local funds at 39% largely represents the county's local contributions for the New Starts program. Regional at 11% represents the regional transit capital funds, which we get approved by legislative authority. These funds are used to match federal grants for bus purchases, technology, and customer and support facilities, etc. This slide represents future spending in the capital program. The left chart represents current authorized future spending of $387 million for projects that have been authorized by the council. The right chart represents future planned projects of $3.9 billion that have not yet been authorized by the council as funding has not yet become available. The largest portion is transitways at $2.9 billion, or 75%, which largely represents the Metro Blue and Green Line extensions. The next largest category is replacement of the fleet for the transit system at $705 million. Fleet are replaced according to fleet management plans and includes all council and suburban transit provider fleet replacement. It also includes planned expansion of the Metro Mobility fleet to meet ridership growth. Facilities at 3% includes passenger facilities and customer facilities, including the completion of the new Minneapolis bus garage. Other costs at 4% include system and computerization, fare collection system upgrades, and other capital equipment.
When we move into the overall CIP program, the capital program, one of the major things that we have as one of our major goals is to maintain our assets in a state of good repair. If you recall, back in 2008, we filed our first program with the Federal Transit Administration, our TAM plan with the Federal Transit Administration. This is a plan that we have to update on an annualized basis, and every 3 years goes through a major update. So that is one of the cornerstones of our CIP plan is maintain our assets in a state of good repair. The next item is new Minneapolis bus garage. We talked about that this evening, but the CIP plan does assume the completion of that 6th garage for Metro Transit. One of the things that we have done over the last couple of years to fully fund this garage, one of the challenges we had with this is we had requested over the last couple of years or numerous years from the legislature funding for this new Minneapolis bus garage. We were unsuccessful in receiving state funding. So one of the things that we worked with last year with the council was actually looking at our current CIP program, looking at our bus ages or those types of items, and seeing what we could do to internally fund the bus garage. One of the big things that we did is we made a change in our bus fleet age going from 12 to 14 years. So that's one of the things that we're watching very closely, watching to see what buses can make the 14 years, which ones can't. Also analyzing buses as they're hitting closer to that 13, 14-year mark. If they need a minor repair, we'll go ahead and do it. But if they need a major repair like an engine, then maybe something that we may not do. But that is one of the things that we were able to do to help us to fully fund the new Minneapolis bus garage. One of the other items that we do have in the program is the continuation of our bus electrification program. As you recall, currently with our C-Line, we currently have 8 electric buses on the C-Line program. We were able to, through some modifications with our current fleet, a slight reduction in our fleet needs with our service plans moving forward into 2020, we did not need as many buses. Through those savings in the buses, we were able to then pull together enough funding to fund an additional 8 electric buses in this CIP program. And what we're choosing to do this time is on the C-Line, we have 8 articulated buses. So what our plans are now is to move forward with 8 40-foot buses. Those are the 40-foot buses that generally we would use in regular route service, day-to-day service. So we want to then bring those buses on in 2020, 2021, analyze how they will work with our regular route service. So we were able to pull together enough money to cover 8 of those buses and then the associated infrastructure, which would be all the charging stations, either in garage or en route. Another item that's within our CIP is maintaining and repairing of our assets on our facilities in a state of good repair. One of the things that we have done per the FTA, we had to go through a condition assessment of all of our facilities, both public and support facilities. As of the end of 2019, we will have gone through this full condition assessment. That's an assessment where we will look at every one of the assets, we'll look at the roof, look at the HVAC, look at the furnaces, look at the parking lots, all the different windows, all the major parts of the structure. For the FTA, we have to give it a rating of a 1 to 5. 3 is in the middle, 5 is good, 1 is in a bad state of repair. Per the FTA, by the end of 2019, the goal was for us to have a condition assessment of about 50% of our assets. By the end of 2019, we will be at the 90% mark. So we're way ahead of what this FTA standards are. And by sometime mid-2020, we will have gone through all of our facilities, both public and customer facilities, with a full condition assessment. Next item is our fare collection equipment. As you are aware, on our buses and our trains, we have both our GFI systems and we have our cubic, the electronic systems. One of the things that's kind of ironic with our GFI systems, they are vintage 1993. So these fare boxes, when the people are putting the magnetic cards in on the buses, that's equipment that is in excess of 25 years old. We're having a hard time at this point in time finding repair parts to keep the repairs going. So we're looking at one of the things that we do have built into the CIP is as we are purchasing new buses, we are actually purchasing new GFI fare equipment with those buses. So our plan is about over the next 8 to 10 years to be able to replace our full GFI system. The good thing about it with the GFI system is the fact is that the old fare boxes will talk to the new fare boxes. It's the same technology, so they will talk to each other and could integrate. So that's a major positive for us. The other thing is with our cubic fare collection system, we always think that's a brand new system, but the last time we upgraded that, first of all, that went live in 2004 with our Metro Blue Line. We upgraded it in 2009 with the North Star commuter rail. We're looking at doing a major upgrade to that system probably in about year 2023, 2024, so we can maintain PCI and other credit card compliance. Let's see, what do I have left? One other item that Mary did mention, there's two other items here. First of all, Metro Mobility growth. Heather will talk about that in a few moments. One of the challenges with the transit system is also with the Metro Mobility growth, as we talked about during our budget presentations. They're seeing anywhere from about a 6 to an 8% growth on Metro Mobility. That has a major impact on the buses. And the kind of analogy, the way we kind of look at it as a fact, is that when you purchase a 40-foot bus, a 40-foot bus will carry 35 to 40 passengers, one operator. One of the challenges on the Metro Mobility, when you have a Metro Mobility bus, it'll carry one to two passengers with one operator. So as the Metro Mobility ridership is growing, it requires a lot more, not only operator labor, which we saw on the operating side, but a lot more buses, a lot more capital buses to make that service roll. One of the other things that Mary did mention is the presentation this evening does include items that we're going to be bringing forward to the council on October 23rd with our capital and operating budget amendment. One of the things that Metro Transit has been, unfortunately, I would say, has been able to achieve this past year in 2019 is we're running a surplus right now. We're forecasting a surplus about $10 to $11 million in bus operations, mainly due to savings in fuel, but the main piece is due to our operator shortage. As you will recall, we've talked about many times that we've had a challenge this year maintaining service with the number of operators that we have on the street. So we've identified about a $10 million one-time savings that we're going to recommend to the council on October 23rd that we would bring from the operating budget and move that motor vehicle sales tax into the capital budget. We would like to identify that into a program for maintaining both bus and rail assets in a state of good repair. So it's going to be a set aside for maintaining assets in a state of good repair. One caveat that Mr. Koister did make a comment on the operating budget is the fact is that this is contingent upon a structural solution from the legislature. We're hoping when we go forward to the legislature, as you recall, on the operating side, we do have a structural deficit a couple years out. So we will set this one-time $10 million aside in the capital budget, but if we're not successful in achieving that structural deficit, we would have the ability then to move it back up into operations if necessary. On the notable modifications of the program, some of the pictures you see here, first of all, you see in the upper left-hand corner is just a pictorial of the new Minneapolis bus garage. You see on the right-hand side, the electric bus. That's with the charging station. That is one of the charging stations, very similar to the charging station that we are currently going through testing right now at our Brooklyn Center transit facility. So basically the bus will come in, it's got an arm, it'll come down, connect with the bus, charge a bus, and then it moves back up again. So that's one thing that during the month of October, November, it'll start testing. And down at the bottom is a Metro Mobility bus. As Heather had mentioned, outside of the transitways, our next largest component of our transit capital program is fleet. We currently have authorized spending of about $55 million for fleet and $705 million for future fleet. As we stated, first of all, our first priority is maintaining our system, maintaining the current fleet, maintaining it in a state of good repair, and we replace all of our fleet per our fleet plans. These fleet plans are also then reviewed by the FTA, and all these fleet plans are also submitted to the FTA. Every time we do a financial management plan, we have to submit to the FTA for their approval our bus fleet plan and our rail fleet plan. So these plans are in concert with the FTA approval. CTIP note payable, this is one thing that we had previously talked about. A few years ago, we had some remaining options on some trains that we were able to exercise with the help of CTIP. We were able to purchase 5 option vehicles for the Metro Blue Line. We were successful in obtaining a $6 million. It was about a $20 million purchase for the 5 vehicles. We were able to obtain a $6 million grant from CTIP for the purchase of the vehicles. We were short the $14 million. Mary and I actually worked with CTIP, and we were actually able to negotiate a 5-year interest-free note payable with CTIP. because they realize the benefit of purchasing the vehicles. They also realize the benefit, the fact is we were able to get a very good price on those option vehicles compared to other vehicles that were out in with other vendors. So we were able to, it was a 5-year interest-free note payable, $14 million, payable in 5 annual installments. The final installment of $2.8 million will be payable in June of 2020. So that will be paid in full. Non-revenue vehicles include all the vehicles for all of our support staff, our street supervisors, and our police. On the replacement side, on the plan side, once again, replacements, all of our vehicle replacements are per our vehicle replacement plans. We do have some buses in the replay or plan side, some ABRT buses for B, D, E, and Orange Line. Many of these buses are funded through CMAQ grants. We've talked about that we do plan to purchase 8 40-foot electric buses within the planned CIP. We will continue to overhaul all of our rail vehicles according to specifications for the manufacturer. One of the things are our Type 1 vehicles, which is the Bombardier vehicles, which are run on the Metro Blue Line. Many of these vehicles have well in excess of 1 million miles. The Type 2 vehicles, which is the Siemens vehicles that are run on the Metro Green Line, many of these vehicles are nearing 400,000 miles. So these vehicles, we need to maintain these vehicles in a state of good repair. Per FTA guidelines, that they are a 30-year vehicle. As we've talked about, buses generally have a life of 12 years. Light rail vehicles have a life of 30 years. So the agreement that we have with the FTA is that we will maintain the vehicles in a state of good repair. And so we were going to move forward and continue to repair these vehicles during the CIP period. And the Southwest Transit also includes some service expansion with some CMAQ funds. On the fleet side, during the CIP period, Metro Transit will be replacing approximately 477 buses, 343 standards, 101 Arctics, the 8 electric buses that we talked about, and 25 coach buses. The overhaul programs that we've talked about will include the Metro Blue Line, which we have 44 vehicles today, Green has 47, and then the North Star with 18. Many of the overhauls will include doors, brakes, motor trucks, interior refreshes, those types of things to not only give customers better satisfaction, but to maintain the asset in a state of good repair.
So just a real brief reminder for those of you that don't know. In the MTS capital program, we budget not only for the MTS service contingent, the suburban transit provider fleet is all of their capital needs are also in the capital budget, somewhere north of $120 million. So when you look at that middle column, which is the MTS fleet, just know that that includes the suburban transit providers as well.
I just wanted to see if there were any questions on the first part of the presentation. Did anybody have anything? The only thing is, can you take the MVES money and you're going to take $10 million, you're going to put it into that capital fund, and then if we don't spend it, you're going to transfer it out and put it back into a operating fund? Is that what you said?
Madam Chair, committee members, yeah, that would be the recommendation, because right now we're currently forecasting between a $10 to $11 million surplus in bus operations due to one-time savings. And it's mainly savings due to operator labor. So with motor vehicle sales tax, we have the ability with motor vehicle sales tax to use that for operations or capital purposes.
Used for either.
So our recommendation would be to take that one-time savings and move it into capital and put it into a project called Building and Rail Maintenance Improvements to maintain assets in a state of good repair. It's a project that we will maintain in the capital program, but we will temporarily hold pending what happens with the legislature. If we get a structural solution from the legislature, we would then we would recommend using it for preventive or maintenance items to maintain the assets in state of good repair. If we still have the structural deficit, we would then have the ability then to move that motor vehicle sales tax back into operations.
I think it's a good plan. The legislature
Madam
often
Chair,
looks at
committee
our
members,
reserves.
that would happen by amendment. So we
Yes.
will make an amendment to move it.
Okay.
And then if we choose to move it back, it'll also be an amendment to move it back.
Okay. So
One of our feelings, Madam Chair and committee members, is the fact that it's one-time savings. Unfortunately, we've had operator shortages, but it's one-time money. And we also, as we talked about, we do see the need to maintain our assets in a state of good repair.
thank you.
Yeah.
See no other questions, Councilmember Stern.
All right. Thank you, Chair. I just was wondering if, with the extra money, if we considered like looking at fuel cell buses or natural gas buses in lieu of our standard diesel or biodiesel buses.
Madam Chair, committee members, that's one of the things that we could do right now. There you go.
I just wanted to mention that in our current capital budget, we have 3 years of the rail maintenance funding in the 6-year plan. The last 2 years of that plan, we did not have the capital funds to do the scheduled rail maintenance, and we're going to be looking at that for the next 3 years. We have significant needs in our current capital plan that we were not able to fund. And how we approached it is we funded in the near term, hoping that we can find funds in the long term. So my best recommendation to you is that this strategy of putting it into a fund that can be used for capital maintenance down the road is the most responsible strategy that we can put forward to you, understanding that it's flexible dollars, and if we run into operation, it can be used for either capital or operations. If we run into operational issues, we can bring it back. I think it's important that we have needs in both capital and operating areas, and it's important that we keep some powder dry in terms of our known ongoing capital needs and our pending operating funding cliff.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you. So we'll move to Metro Mobility.
Sure, and to build on that, this is another challenge that this council is going to likely have to deal with in your tenure here. So Metro Mobility continues to be the big story on the MTS operating budget, and it's the same on the capital side, and mentioned a little bit before this. The MTS fleet continues to grow. A handful of years back, our fleet became bigger than Metro Transit's fleet, and that just is continuing on the path. We've grown for a handful of reasons. The Metro Red Line implementation in 2013, suburban transit providers have expanded through federally funded CMAQ programs. We're expanding Metro Mobility into Lakeville because of this last legislative session, but most of all, it's Metro Mobility ridership growth. Over the last handful of years, we've been growing at about 6% a year on average. So just kind of assume a 6% growth in ridership is going to be roughly a 6% growth in our capital budget as well. The Metmo fleet has grown 100% from 2004 to 2019. That's 290 to 616 buses. And we have another 268 expansion buses programmed from 2020 to 2025. That represents a 200% growth since 2004. On average, Metro Mobility buses get replaced every 5 years. So this is just going to be a compounding problem, and you're seeing that on this graph in front of you. We're going to continue to work on managing Metro Mobility growth as best we can, because at this rate of growth, we're going to soon enter a period where we're going to have some really challenging funding decisions in our capital program. We're fine in this 6-year budget, but not too far out. We're going to have some really challenging conversations. So just consider this as really laying the foundation of we're going to need to have some continued conversations on not only the Metro Transit rail side and their capital maintenance needs, but also the expansion driven by Metro Mobility.
Councilmember Cummings.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can you remind us how Lakeville got added into the Metro Mobility geographic area? And is there a possibility that another community then might be added, putting further strain?
Madam Chair, council members, it was added by state law last year in the legislative session. It'd been looking at it, various bills had been looking at expanding Metro Mobility, some of them from 1 community, some of them to 5 communities. So I think the conversation is out there. Last year we saw bills everywhere from just Lakeville to I think five communities, I think was the most they were looking at adding last year. I am personally uncertain if that we will see additional bills this year. Potentially Mary has something to add to that.
So, Madam Chair and council members, this is one of the strategies that we had in the last session to separate Metro Mobility out in a separate appropriation, because when they do this, then the state should also fund those increases. So when they added Lakeville, they didn't increase our appropriation, but as they look to add different communities, we will be looking for them to add the funding to support those communities, both on the operating side, but as well as on the capital side.
Thank you.
do we ever think of funding a study to figure out cheaper vehicle types or other? I know we're doing the pilot with Uber and things like that. I know you guys are working on this, but just curious if there's some kind of long-term alternative to just buying more buses of the same type.
Madam Chair, council members, I know they have looked at various options. I'm not specifically sure. I can't repeat those back to you, but it's something I'd be happy to follow up on.
Thank you.
Moving on to the next section within our CIP, it's our facilities. This includes all of our customer facilities and all of our support facilities. The customer facilities would be all the shelters. Support facilities would be all of our garages, overhaul bases, those types of items. It includes about $226 million. Currently authorized is around $120 million, planned of about $106 million. One of the big things that we have been doing over the last few years is a lot of energy enhancements, mainly going into a lot of our support facilities and doing a lot of items with LED lighting. We have found that with the LED lighting, it generally has about a 3 to 4 year return on investment, and it has had a very dramatic effect, basically reducing on reductions in our electricity costs. We'll continue to make improvements and repairs to our existing facilities within a state of good repair. In conjunction also with the building of the new Minneapolis bus garage, we're also looking at an overall Haywood campus administrative expansion and rehab. Our building hasn't been done for about 30 years, so we're looking at rehabbing that building and bringing it up to more current standards. And also, as we talked about, the completion of the Minneapolis bus garage. On the plan side, we have the plans for the electric bus infrastructure. With the buses, also comes all the infrastructure for all the charging stations inside the garages and also en route. Hoist replacements, we're looking at doing major hoist replacements in our garages over the next 6 years. We're planning basically hoist replacements 1 per year in each one of the garages. So 1 garage per year. And we're also looking at improvements and repairs and refurbishments to our overall facilities. See a number of our public facilities there. Other costs. $188 million, which includes authorized spending of $34 million and planned of $154. This will include mainly all of our technology. It includes a large portion for IS capital upgrades, including hardware, software, computers, and printers. As we talked about, it includes our fare collection equipment, both the replacement of our 25-year-old vintage GFI fare boxes and an upgrade of our cubic fare collection system. It includes the replacement of the closed captioning TV video systems on our light rail vehicles to more modern technology to give us better video, better evidence to help with investigations and for safety on the trains. We also have some plans for current updates to our current technology for customer communications, message and real-time signs to provide our customers with better information and reliability confidence with their chosen mode of service. The final large category within the transit, which is our largest category, is our transitways, in at $3.1 billion. We currently have authorized $177 million with an additional plan of $2.89 billion. The plan, once again, would be heavily weighted with the planning of getting the full funding grant agreement for both the Blue Line and the Green Line extensions. As you recall, we did complete the C Line construction in 2019. And we would plan then within the CIT to do the Metro Blue and Green Line extensions. We do have partial funding in our CIP for some BRT and ABRT work on Rush, Gold Line, and BRTs. As Wes was mentioning about on the transitway side about our repairs, LRT rail interlocking projects, we have plans for the first 3 years because we're going to be doing major repairs on the interlockings just like we did at the warehouse station on the Blue Line last year. We'll be doing major work on our interlockings. We have planned for the first 3 years covered within the CIP. The last 3 years are right now planned but unfunded right now within the CIP, as Wes had mentioned. We're also going to continue to do ADA and safety improvements on both North Star and LRT, and also plans for some rail replacements during this cycle of time.
Councilmember Gonzalez.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just have a question going back to the improvements to the communication message and all the equipment. Are we making provisions for non-English language messaging on the fare boxes and other places in which we communicate with our customers. And if we're doing so with the new equipment, are those easy to upgrade? I'm thinking as our non-English speaking communities change, we might need to update the different languages that we will want to communicate on. So,
Madam Chair, committee members, I don't have the answer to that, but I will definitely check on both the fare box side, the cubic side, and also then on the communication on the message side.
thank you.
You bet.
Proceed.
Madam Chair, committee members, that is it for transit.
Any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, Councilmember Sterner.
Yeah, just had one. So going back to slide 19 is we have the increase. I'm just wondering where the increase is coming from. Is it coming from more education about our services? Is it coming from obesity, or issues or health or what? And that's I'm just kind of wondering if, or just more population. So we're growing population, so the ridership is growing.
Mr. Petrie or no.
So Madam Chair, council members, you're seeing the baby boom. So we have done studies to try and to do forecasting about what's going to happen with the ridership. Is it going to continue to increase? The studies that have happened so far are indicating that it's going to start leveling off. So we are hopeful that will help take some of the budget pressure off, and we continue to monitor that very closely. But yeah, it's really the aging population, and we're just seeing the impact of it in our service.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Gonzalez.
Yes, just one quick question on this, on the increase of service. You mentioned that there was an increase in the cost when we expanded into Lakeville. What was the increase, the amount, and what did it require to do that? We have to build new infrastructure, etc. It'll be good for us to know what the actual cost is of expansion, and also on the proposed communities that were not expanded. But if we can have like an idea of how much it will cost if the legislature does require that, at least we'll have some talking points as to the impact of increased service. So then we can, have that out there.
So Madam Chair, council members, I can certainly follow up with some talking points. What I can tell you anecdotally is a Metromobility bus with all of the technology on it is just under $100,000. So you can kind of take that. For Lakeville, I believe we added 8 or 9 buses. So that's where we're at with the Lakeville service. On the operation side, I want to say we were right at about $1 million, but for a full year of service. And I will certainly follow up with the different communities that were considered being added in the last legislative session, and what we would project the cost would be for those. We have that data available.
Thank you.
Okay, Councilmember Lee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a question about bus electrification infrastructure. I know we're struggling with the buses on the Sea Line, and I was just wondering at what point will we consider, severing that relationship and looking at other vendors to do the electric buses?
Bring Mr. Koister forward for that one.
We had Madam Chair, council members, we had a meeting with New Flyer today and representatives of New Flyer, both and their subcontractor Siemens about this. They presented a plan to get to a solution. They probably brought in about 8 people, including people from the corporate office in Winnipeg. They tried to press upon us today that they were taking this matter seriously, that they were putting all resources to this matter. And I think your question is a fair question. And I am also meeting with the president of Flyer when I attend the APTA conference in New York this weekend. So we're talking very bluntly about our frustration, our urgency in this matter. And I'm hearing responsiveness, but of course, hearing responsiveness is different from a solution. So we've made that clear. We appreciate the commitments they're making right now. We appreciate the attention they're giving us, but in the end, it either works or it doesn't work. And that message has been conveyed.
Okay, thank you. And I know you've been keeping us up to date, so thank you for that, and we'll look for an update.
You bet. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, thank you. Why don't we move on to our
Thank you.
last group, right? Which we have Parks is next.
I'm going to put on my other hat.
Oh, okay, so Parks.
So Heather Augustin-Huebner, CD Finance. So let's move on to Parks and Open Space. We never fail to try and take the opportunity to talk about the great Parks and Open Space system that we have. We have a nationally renowned system, and we have 56 regional parks and park reserves totaling more than 54,000 acres and nearly 400 miles of interconnected trails and 8 special recreation features. The system provides a wealth of opportunities for recreation and exercise, and it also preserves significant green space and wildlife habitat. The regional park system had nearly 60 million visits in 2018. That's more than the Mall of America. Our system adds untold value to the livability and attractiveness of our communities. The overall Parks Capital Program is $389 million, which includes currently authorized and future planned projects. Uses by department represents where the funding will go. We know that 100% of funds will be passed through, and that about $315 million will go to implement the regional parks implementing agencies based upon funding formulas. We also know that another $40 million will also go to implementing agencies through the land acquisition program, so we've called that out specifically. The remaining $34 million represents the equity grant program and direct appropriations, commonly referred to as earmarks. Based upon history, we anticipate that 40% of the funds will be used to improve the existing parks and trails, 36% will go to expand the system, and 24% will be used to preserve the system. These percentages may adjust over time based upon how implementing agencies prioritize their projects. On the sources side, the state funds 84% of the capital program, with the council's regional match making up the 16% balance. The council does not match direct appropriations. This slide represents future spending in the capital program. The left chart represents current authorized future spending of $72 million for projects that have been authorized by the council. The right chart represents future planned projects of $221 million that have not yet been authorized by the council, as funding has not yet been secured. I'll provide examples of a couple specific projects in the next couple slides. So we have a couple notable modifications to call out. First, as Mary mentioned before, we're building on our approved 2019 to 2024 CIP. The first commitment that I want to call out is we're anticipating the council will continue to match state of Minnesota appropriations as directed by statute and/or council policy. Our adjustments are primarily adding 2025 to the CIP. We have programmed anticipated legacy, environmental and natural resources trust fund dollars, and council bond revenues and expenses. We have also made a minor adjustment to how ENRTF funds are programmed. So what we ended up doing is taking a look at the investment that the council made in this program for 6 years. And before it was programmed every other year, what we've done is taken that same amount of money and just evened it out. So it's distributed on an annual basis. That'll give us more flexibility to apply for grant applications with the regional parks implementing agencies. The council serves as the fiscal agent to distribute legacy and bond dollars in support of the Metropolitan Regional Park System. Legacy funds are allocated to each park implementing agency in accordance to a formula set in state statute, and bond dollars are allocated based on a formula in the parks policy plan. We have about $49 million remaining to be spent on currently authorized projects and $190 million planned. Planned dollars are budgeted at the program level, in this case by anticipated implementing agency share of the state bonding and legacy dollars, and that's the chart that you'll see on your right. This slide summarizes land acquisition spending. We have about $8 million left to spend on authorized projects and plan to spend $29 million in new land acquisition projects. Land acquisition projects are funded by ENRTF, Parks and Legacy funds, and a council match. Our other category includes direct appropriations or earmarks from the legislature and the planned equity grant program. The map you see is the Lake Links Trail around White Bear Lake, and that's an example of the direct appropriation. And as Community Development Committee and the Council is aware, we are currently piloting our equity grant program, and our first round of applications have been received and will shortly be entering the review process. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Are there any questions? Okay, thank you. Good presentation.
Thank you.
Mary, any final
So,
comments?
Madam Chair and council members, at our next council meeting, we will ask that you adopt our public comment draft unified budget, which includes both of the operating budget as well as the capital program.
Thank you. Right, so I see that Tawana's here, so if you want to come up, and we're looking forward to your presentation. Welcome to the council.
Thank you. Should I stand or sit? Do you have a preference?
Whatever you'd like to do. Yeah.
Stand. Good afternoon, and thank you for the invitation. I apologize. I think the time that I had, the time you had, were probably a little bit different and off, and I think that my schedule adjustments didn't help that either. So apologies for the adjustments in schedule and flow. It's great to be able to share more about the Center for Economic Inclusion and our work with you. Several members of your team were very instrumental in our founding and have continued to be instrumental in the development of the center and our work and ongoing objectives throughout the region over the last 2 years, and our partnership has been very beneficial to our efforts to be able to strengthen the region's economy and at the same time be able to move forward, building an inclusive economy and ensure that people of color in this region are moving toward and beyond parity in employment, income, and wealth in the region. So I'm going to share a little bit about our founding, about the work that we are established to be able to move forward with, and explore opportunities for answering questions that you might have about ways that we can partner more deeply here in the region. And I believe that you have printed materials you do in front of you as well. So the Center for Economic Inclusion is an organization that is cross-sector, that is designed to be able to disrupt those market forces, the systems that exist within our region's economy that prevent us from being able to have an economy that works for everyone. We disrupt and dismantle systems and practices in partnership with organizations and leaders throughout the region, and then catalyze new civic infrastructure, policy systems, and practices that will move forward that economy. And I'll talk a little bit more about how and why in just a moment. And most notably, we are the only organization in the country that is designed to operate exclusively in that lane, though we are being called upon in many cities across the country to help others create organizations in similar fashion as we speak. Some of the backstory for those of you who might not be quite as familiar with our work about why, when we launched this work to be able to create the center now almost 3 years ago, or right at 3 years ago, these were some of the reasons for that work and are important to be able to think about as you think about all the organizations, including the council, who do work in any of the domains in which we work. One was that we found that in this region we have a number of efforts and people and organizations who are focused on this work, but we find that very often we go about the work of disparities from a charity mindset. Not that we would call it that, but when you think about the work of inclusiveness, that too many people seem to look at that work of helping others, helping lift others, and begin to, after a few years of not seeing the progress, start to talk about it and frame it as charity, of helping others, as opposed to being able to keep it in that perspective of really this is good for all of us. And certainly the council itself is one that is focused really well on being able to chart not only the data, but the narrative around the economic impact that all of us will benefit from when we are able to close finally the economic and racial gaps that exist in our region, and then being able to advocate for those things at scale. We also found that we had weak accountability between sectors, and this is something that requires all sectors to be actively engaged and not just talking about economic inclusion, not just talking about disparity solutions, but actively engaged in the solution making. And that right now, today, we don't have the ability to drive strong accountability from one sector to another. When we were in our launching phase, we found that each sector wanted the center to be created, whether it was at a state level, a regional level, city, whether it was in the
private sector of Fortune 500s to small businesses at the grassroots level and community-based organizations or very large nonprofits, but each was pointing to the other to say, yes, government was saying, go fix that, make those Fortune 5s get their act together. Fortune 5s were pointing at the governor and at mayors and saying, make them get their act together. But none felt like they could drive true shared accountability from one to another. So we need structures that allow us to sit not just elbow to elbow, but arm in arm and feel like we have the infrastructure to drive shared accountability one to another, but also standards for what best practices look like, for what progress looks like, and ultimately need to be accountable to communities, need to be accountable to the people who rely on each one of us to get up every day and go to work in the name of creating an inclusive economy. We also find that those of us who work at the regional level struggle often to be able to then zoom down into place, to be able to zoom down into neighborhoods and to keep our attention focused on place-based opportunity, place-based change, whether that place is in neighborhoods that we might hear about frequently, like the North Side, where I've spent my focus for the last 6 years, or the East Side, or places that have challenge in terms of economics or race that are in suburban areas, and then focus on regional opportunity and how to connect the assets that exist in those places and neighborhoods, both land and people, at the same time. How to do that, not again, that charity perspective, but how to constantly keep the ability to zoom in and act in place while we're thinking about the region, how to act at a regional level and think about place. And we found that while innovation has occurred in our region, we've been able to act in inclusive ways and to do so with innovation, whether we're thinking about work that has occurred in the Central Corridor. We've been able to do that work and sustain economic growth with businesses that are owned by people of color. We've been able to do work in place and see investments in housing really successfully. We've been able to do work through our spending. We've been able to do work in workforce development. We struggle to institutionalize and codify that work so that when the next opportunity comes, whether that's a population or a place or an investment along transportation or transit, we're not starting back at A. We're starting back at 0, but we're starting at, say, M. We're starting back at 10. We're building from the places that we've left off because we've codified and institutionalized. And so we had a need to be able to use data to build those linkages that take us to scale. So those are some of the reasons to ignite a shift that moves us from awareness and consciousness over to action. And those are also some of the reasons for an independence center. I'm going to keep moving in the interest of time and knowing that you have these resources. So the way that we work is really working at the intersection of a few domains that are also places that you work. However, it moves us from working in each of those areas in columns, in silos, to saying, how do we begin to work at the intersections? Thinking about the intersections of human capital, workforce development, economic development, transportation and access, which for us includes housing and home ownership, to say, how do we think about how people live their lives? That people don't live their lives, you or I or anyone else, in those columns, but we live our lives depending on each one of those systems to work in an interrelated way. Whether you're a business owner, a leader in a business, an individual who is depending on those systems to operate, or someone who's seeking a job, you depend on those systems to be very interrelated, and therefore those of us who are seeking to change those systems need to think about them and operate in them and with them in that same interrelated, interdependence way. We also need the ability to be able to assess challenges and opportunity through the lenses of race, place, and income. We started there with race, recognizing the work that Manuel Pastor has done, says that the only cities that will thrive in the future are those that can talk about race and talk about it all the time. And we would echo that, but would also say that place and income come into play quite frequently as well. So if you were to think about the challenges that a job seeker who has been unemployed for 7 years might be facing, that job seeker might face barriers that are, yes, tied to his or her race. But that job seeker might also be facing barriers that are related to place, the neighborhood that I live in, and whether or not that neighborhood has jobs that are related to the skills that I have. But I also might face barriers that are related to my income and whether or not I can actually afford the transportation solutions that are available to me, whether or not I can afford the childcare that I need in order to take advantage of the job that is available to me, whether or not I can afford the health care that I might need to navigate in order to be able to afford that, whether or not I can afford the uniform that's required in order for me to take advantage of the job opportunity once I get that, or the education that's required to get that job. We need to, as practitioners, be able to assess each one of those, whether we're talking about workforce development or economic development, transportation or access. But for a very long time, We focused maybe in one of those domains. And then not particularly well. Not particularly well in our ability to articulate it, our ability to not just diagnose the problem, but to also be able to solve it. And so our organization's strength is in helping leaders in the public sector and private sector specifically build that muscle to do that, and to do it not only at the top levels at boards like this, not only at the C-suite levels, though it does start there often, but to do it throughout the entire institution and to do it every single day, because it takes that to be able to dismantle the way that we've done it for a very long time, which has only worked for a small section of people, and to do it across all of the domains that you see in the materials and in your screens right now. The way that we're going about our work, and we are just coming into now moving into the third year of our work starting next month, are through these three objectives that you see right now. The first is in creating broad, measurable, shared accountability. To create an economy across the 7-county metro, which is where we focus, that truly works for everyone will take a lot of people and a lot of organizations deeply doing our work very differently together. Measuring shared accountability, measuring how we work together differently, not just annually, but every day. And driving that accountability among decision and policymakers. That means facilitating tables of shared accountability. It means coming together and using frameworks like results-based accountability to say, how do we measure our goals? And I'll talk in a moment about our indicators for an inclusive regional economy that were released in April and that we have been working with leaders to become institutionalized, but also to facilitate now goal setting that is happening across the region. We also do that work by disrupting exclusive policies and practices, and those that have exclusive results that may not have been set up to produce exclusive results, but that are in fact having that outcome today. We do that through consulting with private sector organizations, through consulting and contracts with public sector institutions, like the work that we did with 6 cities and 1 county on their 2040 comprehensive plans to help them fully incorporate economic inclusion and racial equity into those comp plans, and now work that we're doing with several of those institutions to make sure that we don't just have nice plans, but we know how to go about deeply disrupting the way that we work every day so that those plans become a reality, whether that means changes in the way that we're staffed inside planning and economic development departments, changing the way that we work with developers, changing the way we work with communities. And lastly, partnering to enable the regional and place-based infrastructure of that racial and economic opportunity. In addition to our partners outside our organization, like Met Council and many other institutions, inside the center we have the Northside Thunders Group, a collaborative of corporate, family, and community foundations focused on changing the way that they invest in North Minneapolis, the organization I've led for the last 6 years. We also have the Eastside Thunders Group, a comparable organization in the east side of St. Paul, and the Greater Metropolitan Workforce Council, all focused on creating deeply different results in our region and inside the center in order to make sure that we're leveraging our resources and accelerating change and impact in the center, in the region, One of the things that I wanted to share with you today are the way that we go about that in terms of the measurements. And so you have before you in your brochures the indicators for an inclusive regional economy. We brought together many organizations, including, I'm really grateful for, staff from Met Council over a year ago now, to begin thinking about what indicators regional leaders and policymakers in all sectors needed to have a better sense of what is happening in our region that either drives growth forward in a way that helps us understand that both the region's economy is growing and people of color are moving forward in employment, income, and wealth, or we're not. And to start thinking about ways that leaders could look at data on a frequent enough basis inside their organizations and understand what levers do I pull to see that needle move. That team started off by starting with the indicators that are released by Greater MSP and the regional partnership on an annual basis, and they began by informing that process and resulted in some changes that took place to the dashboard in 2018. And then moved to studying indicators that range from everything from the Sustainable Development Goals from the UN that relate to economic inclusion to Rockefeller's 168 indicators on economic inclusion. Can you imagine that number? To then prioritizing and assessing indicators that come from Met Council and the Federal Reserve Bank and many others. And they landed on these 14. It's 14 indicators that we could all begin to look at that help us understand how to take the trends that you see on the screen right now that show us that while we've been a region that has been able to applaud ourselves for growth for a very long time, as being one of the best for many things, and one of the worst for people of color in many other areas, that those two things are starting to converge in a way that is not good for any of us. That we have an opportunity to say no longer can we afford to see those trajectories going in the wrong way. For the last 10 years, after all the effort that we've all put in, all the hours, all the commissions, all the associations, all the investment, we have only closed the wage gap by 1%. In 10 years, we've closed by 1%. If that was any other factor, a lot of people would lose their jobs. But because it's race, because it's hard, because it's those things we don't tend to talk about, we assemble another task force. We assemble another report. We study it some more. It's time to stop that. It's time to actually set goals and time to move the needle. And that's just what we're doing. So this set of indicators looks across inclusive growth, economic development, human capital, transportation, and access at multiple levels of income, race, and place. You have the dashboard in front of you. If you were to go to our website, you would see that you can drill down, in some cases down to the census tract level. In all cases, you can drill down into the city level across the 7-county metro to begin to understand what is happening and why it's happening. You can pull stories from different organizations and institutions who are moving the needle on each one of these indicators, and we continue to refresh those throughout time so that individuals and institutions have the resources that they need to be able to move the needle. And we'll continue to do that with Brookings as our data partner and with others here locally like yourselves, partnering with us to move the needle because it's required in order for us to create change. And lastly, I'm going through these because you mostly know this data. What's most critical is that we do move into goal setting and ultimately moving the needle.
Councilmember Shambliss.
Oh, I can wait until she's.
You want to wait? Okay.
No, actually, that is the last piece. So I'm excited to say that with this goal setting, we are now gathering community members, leaders, organizations in goal setting. We're committed to setting goals across at least 5 of these 14 that you see on the screen right now. I'm excited to say that the Greater Metropolitan Workforce Council just adopted 2 days ago goals in 4 of these areas that go deeper into employment and workforce development and labor force participation and educational attainment. And we're thrilled to be able to move forward and excited for a deeper partnership with you all that allows us to support the work that is happening here to push that work forward. And I'm certainly open to questions and ideas that you have for work we can do together to be able to move the region's economy forward with people of color at the center.
Great question. Great presentation. Councilmember Chambliss.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I ditto. That was a great presentation. I really appreciate that we have people who have done the research, who have done the studies, who have assessed what is needed so that we can move the needle forward. And I'm looking forward to hearing more about the work that you're doing and your impact with the Metropolitan Council. I'm especially intrigued with your stressing that with the disparities that we have in Minnesota, we're not just doing the studies when we are unsuccessful in closing the gaps, but we're going to be trying to accelerate change and also accelerate the progress. So I'm looking forward to seeing that, and I thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Councilmember Barber.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And great presentation. I really appreciate the information. So I'm one of the council members who served on the Dayton administration before this. And so looking at racial and socioeconomic equity and how to address disparities has been something that we worked on and now we continue to work on under the Wells Council. One thing that I think when you talk, I'm really intrigued by your sort of disruptive approach to things. I think when you talk, we've got state government, city, but there's several agencies under state government, and part of it, we do some things here, Minnesota Housing does some things here, DEED does something, and sometimes it's breaking along those silos, I think is something that we really need to look at because, we have an equity advisory committee, there's the same sort of thing in all these other agencies, but how do we actually kind of break that down so we know we're actually pushing in the right areas. Each of us is using the right levers that we have to kind of advance things. I don't expect a really fast answer because that's a big question, but I think that would be a really interesting place to kind of look at kind of our role and state agencies' goals with it.
I would echo that. I served on Governor Wallace's Transition Advisory Commission, and you may or may not know my former COO is in Governor Wallace's administration as well. And while it hurt me deeply to lose her, I was most grateful for that because I know she brings the lens and shares the philosophy that we do, which is that that through line must exist throughout the administration. And while we work closely with leadership in several of the agencies, one of the pieces that we're pushing the hardest for is not only partnership and collaboration, but a through line around data and the need for not just state agencies to share data, but for our systems to become much more linked so that individuals who are being not just served by, but working with and alongside different agencies have the ability for those agencies to be talking to one another, for their systems to be talking to one another. And a simple example I would give is right now, if you took DEED and DEED system for workforce development, if you took the data that exists within HHS and you took the data that exists within Department of Labor, if those three systems talk to one another, people who are unemployed and employers' lives would be much more simple. And certainly the organizations who are serving those job seekers, we would accelerate the pace at which we know whether or not programs are actually being successful and our ability to know what to lean into faster. It's just common knowledge. And that's not just a Minnesota challenge, that's a national challenge, right? But some places have figured that out by investing in that data infrastructure. I'm grateful to say, I think both, not just those three departments, but also our information technology leaders get that and want to, but it's a matter of how quickly do we invest in that, knowing that it's in the best interests of our economy in addition to people. But that's certainly a place that we would agree with, and I believe the administration has heard it, and now it's about how we continue to push for that investment.
Thank you.
And one thing I would just to talk about that a little bit more is the governor's going through a strategic planning, right? And then so are all the agencies. So we're all creating 3 to 5 goals that are going to roll up into the governor's goals. And what we're finding is a lot of agencies have some of the same goals, especially around equity, around housing is another one. And he's created, I'm sure you know this, the 5 interagency areas, which are children, climate, corrections, housing, and equity. And so I think it's a really good opportunity by setting the goals, it's going to hopefully help us focus on that and then, accomplish that. And so one thing I heard is that if we're going to talk about equity here at the council, and that has shown up in we've set 4 areas, and equity is one of those, as well as sort of equity as well as disparities, and doing both sides of that is that you need to be part of that conversation, I think. And so how, as Councilmember Chambliss said, is, but how do we do that? You've done the data, so now how do we take the next step and make that more of a reality? So I'm hoping, when you talked at the beginning about how we can partner, I think that would be a really interesting partnership for us to fit into this and figure out the how and the where, even though we know this is going to take some time, as you seem to be the one with the biggest sort of lens out there right now, and you can see all of this is how we fit in will be very interesting. So we'll be interested in your perspective. So we have a couple other council members. Councilmember Lindstrom.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Great presentation. And I think you mentioned that there were 6 cities that included your work on inclusion in their comprehensive planning process. I won't put you on the spot to name all 6 cities, but I'm wondering if there are some things that stand out that 1 or 2 or 3 of those comp plans include that are really innovative around inclusion.
Certainly, I think, and we worked, I would say one of the things that was helpful to us was in we did our work in partnership with the council staff and didn't vote because we didn't want to surprise the council like, okay, wait a minute, we're out here. So we did partner, and we issued, I should say, we started by issuing a statement to all cities and towns in the jurisdiction to say, here are staples that we believe everyone should have within their plans. And then we targeted those that had the highest percentage and concentration of communities of color and the highest opportunity to be able to go deeper. And some, said instantly to us, like, wait a minute, this is a comp plan. It has nothing to do with race and equity and economic inclusion. And we reminded those, like 94, asked those folks who were impacted by interstates of that. And that helped people say, okay, wait a minute, we can talk to you. Elements that I would say were most critical are about a couple things. And we have some staples that are just core to our work. And one is how data informed are your policies and procedures. And while several of the plans that we commented on might have had it in one element or another, so you might have had it in housing, but where we did not see that become a through line throughout the entire plan, we worked with those cities to say, how do you make sure that you didn't just have a data informed element in this space, but you didn't follow it all the way through? How are you, say, making your commitment to invest in being data informed all the way through? How do you have results and not just say we're going to measure, say we have an indicator here, but we don't have a way to evaluate that all the way through? Let's speak to that. The other is, how are you going to be both market responsive and racially responsive? Because it takes both, right? We need to be able to understand the market that we're operating in, and that's a space that I think all of us and all of our work are still struggling and coming to, but we believe is critically important that we're responsive to the market because it is changing constantly. And for a very long time, we've operated as businesses over there and government is over here and community. And businesses is guilty as well, like government will solve for that. We try to drive and approach this as we all have to be looking at all sides of that. And so we pushed cities and we worked with Ramsey County as well, asked us to come in after they saw the work that we did with 6 cities. And so we pushed folks to say, how responsive are you being to the market? How much do you understand about decisions that developers are making, and what effort are you going to be making in this comp plan to be able to understand and move with the market, or to move the market, to be able to make some changes and incent and push the market in your comp plan? And how will you know that? If people or cities were really aggressive in land use planning and restrictions, then we ask, can you see that same type of push, for instance, in housing? Or if you were really aggressive in housing, then let's see that same push here. So some of it also was about the parallel, like, oh, wait a minute, you said you couldn't do this, but we saw you do it over here. Let's see the through line in different places. So our team really went hands-on in places where others invited us, where cities invited us to go hands-on. And that need to center people to really look for what are those opportunities to really walk alongside. So where some of the core metro cities might have really great examples or relationships with developers of color or developers who are used to doing projects in and with communities of color, being able to encourage those who were not to say, how do you do that work more deeply? We also had a couple of cities or suburban areas who staff might have been comfortable in going a place but said, we don't know, we don't think our board, our council will go for this. And so we want to put this in Center for Economic Inclusion, but we have zero shot of getting this through. There we said, okay, well, how do we partner to go the distance here? And so it's not for us. We weren't just shooting to have our name listed on their websites as having been the ones who got the language. We're really in this for the long haul about what does it mean to get your council over time to work more deeply with your staff and your community to produce a different set of outcomes. And we had other cases where the plans were actually awesome already, and they didn't need our language. They needed our work in community partnership to say, you've already created quite an aggressive and inclusive plan. So how do you anchor this plan so it can be owned by your entire community, so that if there are neighborhoods or populations who don't know that you've taken this really inclusive approach to your economic development plan, how do you make sure that they are aware of it? How do you invite community in, and how can we help you in that space? So it looked a little bit different in each case, but work that you can't tell I love what I do, and so does my team. And so a work that we really found to be enjoyable. And I'll give credit to Mayor Fry, who initially asked us to come in for just one piece. He said, we're going to come in, we're going to read the whole plan, and we're going to review and respond to the whole plan. And once we did that, we said, okay, we're not only going to respond to Minneapolis's plan, we want to, if we're going to get involved in the work of comp plans, we're going to get involved in the work of comp plans, and that took us down a bigger path. Does that answer
Thank
your
you.
question?
Yeah, great.
Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you. I just really appreciate all the work that you're doing. And in my former role at Greater MSP, I really understood that, this is not just a one-off. This is really infusing some of the core stuff that needs to happen in economic development so that we really get to prosperity for all. So I thank you for that. I really also appreciate the mindset shift. It's not charity. This is a necessity. It's part of everything that we do, and everybody has to be doing it. And I really, one of the things, and everyone here is going to be sick of me saying this, but everybody's saying it. It's about alignment. So we have our pieces of the puzzle in Met Council, and cities have their piece, and counties, nonprofits, and corporates. But if we can get to better alignment, and that's why I like these dashboards, everything's rooted in data, and we have to level set and align with each other and pull it together. So I think, it is a long haul. There's going to be a lot of work, but we had our moment in time where, if we just lean into this all together and try to figure out how we synchronize our work, figure out where we have gaps, and figure out where we can be better, I really have hope for this. So I really appreciate your leadership and your team's leadership on this, and I'm really excited about the council working more closely with you.
Thank you, Councilmember.
We have several. We have a couple of more, about 4 more. So Councilmember Lee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Full disclosure, at my day job, I work at Nexus Community Partners, and the president and CEO of our organization is on the CEI board. So I appreciate all the work that you do. I just want to say that it's really important that you remind folks that economic inclusion is historical. It's about sometimes righting some wrongs historically. In the last, and it's very much place-based, and it's about people. In the last 30 years, we've had huge corporations from Bayer to Volkswagen apologize for their role in the Holocaust. When I was testifying for the city of St. Paul's council in support of the soccer stadium, I said, between the 80s and 90s, when the white flight to the suburb left Midway kind of empty, who came into Midway to hold it down and to start new businesses? Poor black and brown folks, immigrants and refugees, the Hmong folks, the Karen, Africans, Hispanics. And then they held it down long enough until one day we decided we put a train along it, and then one day the soccer stadium wants to come in. And so we have to hold companies accountable. They have as much a stake in the historical investment and disinvestment in communities of color as anyone else. And so I appreciate the work you do.
Thank you so much.
Councilmember Lilligren.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Black, thanks for being here. Thanks for your report and all the work that you're doing and the enthusiasm that you bring to this work. And congratulations on the progress you've made in the center. And I'm really excited about where the center is at and its growth and trajectory. We're a new council, very equity-minded council. And so, like the chair, like my other colleagues, I look forward to a continued and productive partnership in this work. And I am especially interested in your strategic objective about measurable shared accountability, and especially around issues of race and inequities, the ability to sort of not be accountable for things really serves the status quo and preserving the status quo. I think in this council already we're trying to figure out how to be more regional and be more supportive regionally and with our regional partners. And I think this accountability piece is really key. And the experience I'm having right now is more around the issues of unsheltered homelessness, but there's been a real shift in a regional approach and in the comprehensive approach like the Institute practices, when really all stakeholders within the environment of the unsheltered homelessness response have come together. They're the political and public will to change and are now sort of systematizing how that happens. And this accountability piece is very interesting, and often we'll get involved, and a lot of us here have local government experience as well, and here at the council as well, and it's what I call jurisdictional not it. I don't do that. You do that, you do that, I do this. And so as we move into this realm of measurable shared accountability, I'm fascinated to learn more about the sort of practical bits and the logistical parts of it. And so I was just quickly looking around your website, and I wasn't finding that right off, but I'm just wondering, maybe not at this moment, but if we can continue to correspond and you can help me find more ways to learn about these tools of measurable shared accountability.
Absolutely. And if you would give me a website pass, my communication person transitioned just between the time that we've moved back to this language and the websites. We have not updated it, but I can send you a tool and I can describe it in one way, in a simple example, because it actually is taking us back to something we did before we became the center. In the interim before, so Northside Funders Group, that's my history. Many of you, maybe if you were, depending on council time and what you did before that, might recall corridors of opportunity, partnership for regional opportunity, that were Living Cities Integration Initiative that were anchored at the St. Paul Foundation. When Partnership for Regional Opportunity ended, Living Cities didn't go away. It moved to my organization, to Northside Funders Group, and we began what now is the center of bringing partners together with this notion of how do we act local and think regional. Living Cities said to me, we love what we've done in the Twin Cities. We want something, though, that has population level outcomes, Tawana. We want to take what the Twin Cities has been doing, and we want population level outcomes, to your point of how do we get beyond the theory's nice, but how do we know anybody's life is different as a result of that? And Mary Kay Bailey, who's still a great friend and led that work, and just talked to her 2 days ago about a project, said, Tawana, what we've done is great, but what you talk about is like the it. How do we take all of this and get to that population level? And so Living Cities helped us take a results-based accountabilities framework that I just shared with the Workforce Council 2 days ago. And we started bringing partners together. This is 4 years ago, sitting around tables, doing the same thing that Corridors and Partnership Regional Opportunity had done. But to say, we can talk about the results we want, that big 10-year results. We can talk about the drivers we want in 5 years. What are those outcomes? And then the key drivers and levers we want. But what we found when we then did the query to say, okay, which part of that are you in for? And which part of that are you in for? And you and you and you? We would have most of that covered. But then there'd be those bubbles that, wait a minute, nobody at this table does. Nobody's responsible for that. Nobody owns that. And that's where we've got to get to the nitty gritty of. And this is the population level outcome we want. And in our case, 4 years ago, it was wanting to get to parity in African American employment for the entire region by 2025. Well, if one of the big factors in that is crime, and in that case, that was one, I pulled the chart up just 2 days ago, and nobody at the table is working on that, but we all agree it's big. Well, then we don't have the table set right. Then we've got to have other people at the table. But historically, the way we work is like, well, but I don't know if we want anybody there. If we're really committed to place, to your point, Councilmember Lee, then we have to say, okay, we're going to change the table. We're going to change the way we work. We're going to make the table bigger. We're going to have other people at the table. We're going to change the construct. And that's that tool of results-based accountability, of keeping it always about that shared accountability that you do get to call me out if I didn't do what I said I was going to do a month ago. And that's a space that when we formed the center, we had other partners at the table who, I'll be honest, were saying, okay, we're going to step into those spaces. We're going to do that work, Tawana. And we took some steps back from that and zeroed into our other lanes of work. This summer, we took a step into SWOT analysis and invited community in to give us feedback. And we heard, you need to step back into that. That is not being done anywhere else in the region. We need people convening those tables. We need people convening those spaces. And we need the shared accountability more than anything. And we need the tools. We can't learn it in 6 months. We don't learn it in 9 months. It's not a typical way of working. And having all sectors at the same table with community is also not a way that we are typically used to working, and keeping that population level result front and center with the data. It takes practice, it takes knowledge, it takes expertise. And that's a space that people in this community ask us to step back into over and over. And we committed to do that just this summer with our board and our staff.
Right.
So it will be back to the website, but I'd be happy to send those tools.
And Madam Chair, and please just back, please, no, I was not criticizing.
Oh, no, I didn't take it that way. I was excited to be able to lean in.
And also, thanks for that history. That's really helpful. And I would just observe that I was in local government during the time that the Corridors of Opportunity was coming together, and then watching the resources come together and the whole process. And it's amazing to see how the Corridors of Opportunity continue to impact our regional conversation here. And it's opened up, I think, ways of communicating and build capacity in the most impacted communities and the communities that need it to be at the table. And so it's great to see that kind of investment continue to yield and to grow in this concentric way. So again, thanks again. I look forward to talking again soon. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Councilmember Cummings.
Thank you. Councilmember Lilligren pretty much asked my question, but it was about accountability. I think that is very challenging, especially for us as a council and trying to advance this work. And your answer was very, very helpful. I think it's very challenging to figure out where we can have accountability, how we look for accountability, who we hold accountable, and how we move that forward. But I think it's absolutely critical in advancing the work that we're trying to do. So I appreciate that. I won't take any more time, but I will just say thank you. This was just outstanding, and it's so timely. I mean, it's always going to be timely because unfortunately it will never be a done topic, but it really informs the work that we're doing currently. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
And Councilmember Gonzalez.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just have two quick questions maybe. They're kind of related as to the depth of the work that you do. The first question is like looking at the data from the Latino community, the community is so diverse, and I was wondering if you do dig deeper into disaggregating the data amongst, recent immigrants from Venezuela or relocating people from Puerto Rico versus people that just came from El Salvador or Guatemala, because those different communities bring different challenges, assets, and interests. So it's sometimes it's really hard to just talk about the Latino community as opposed to the different groups. So I think it's very important to disaggregate the data and to set goals and challenge and expectations based on the specific characteristics of those subgroups. And the second question that I had it's kind of related to that, to the deep dive, is when I was working at the Department of Labor and Industry, one of the missions of the agency was to regulate certain professions, such as electricians. One of the things that we saw is that a lot of people from recent immigrant communities were not applying for the licenses because they only had that in English. So is that the type of detail work, like looking down into the weeds of different organizations that you try to do to remove those barriers, to make sure that the institutions and organizations are more responsive?
So I'll take the second question first.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely, it is. And the good news is that in those industries, typically, those tend to be industries that are desperate for talent, that are hurting the most from an economic standpoint. And so their motivation for being able to take on those barriers and start to remove them is higher when we point them out, when we are able to identify this is a barrier that is precluding you from being able to access all of the talent that exists and is right on the sidelines for you to tap into. Their motivation for being able to take on those barriers is higher now in this market than it would be in another time, because they need the talent, and the talent is right there. So that's exactly the type of thing that we take on, whether it is things like that, or I've spent some time with Meredith and assessing some barriers that exist even here within the council. Other things, whether it's basic minimum qualifications or a simple one. We have another large employer who is working with us, and they are just in Northeast, but their drug testing was in St. Paul at 7 a.m. And their talent base they were targeting were people who don't have transportation. Well, hello, like that doesn't make any sense. Let's move the drug testing somewhere closer. You already want this talent, but you get them right up to the edge of hire, and then you kick them back out over something silly. Like, let's fix that. We can fix that. So we get all in those weeds of things to say, let's fix barriers that are very easily fixed. And we remind them that when you don't fix them, you put a narrative on people of color and immigrants and indigenous people that just says, oh, those folks don't want jobs. When actually, no, we've created systemic barriers that are completely unnecessary. And for many years, people have paid the price for those barriers with a damaging narrative. To your first question, yes. And many populations, both the Latino population, Asian population, and others, have a need for us to be much more disaggregated. I'm grateful to say, since the time of the publication of the indicators, which was April 30th was when we released them, publication then was about a month prior to that, the state demographer released a much deeper level of disaggregated data, literally, I think within days of us finalizing the document, that is much better within those populations. And that is where we're headed for the release that'll come out on the next summit is April 30th. So that'll be the next release of data. The website will continue to be updated prior to that. But yes, it is critical to us, and we guide every partner we work with to use as much disaggregated data as is possible to inform strategy. That's for the dashboard and the indicators. That said, from a measurement perspective and goal setting, our partners, we push to be able to be doing that on a regular basis, right? So if you're serving a particular population in place, then we want our partners measuring that and having the latest in terms of what your applications say. Are you using the right questions, the right language to be able to measure that specifically? And I would use the example from a talent perspective of the Greater Metropolitan Workforce Council of being very specific. And I'm thrilled to say that in that and setting their goals, they chose to have both macro and micro goals and to really zero in to say when should a goal be about the region? When should the goal be about the Latinx population? When should a goal be about women? To be sure that we know which lever is going to move the region forward the fastest, and then when do we come in and disaggregate? When do we pay attention to data that's coming out of our post-secondary institutions versus our nonprofit community-based training organizations? Because we know who has not only the best data, but who has the greatest propensity to move the economy forward. And then how do we invest in them and their ability to capture data, to measure that data, and to move us forward? And that's a space that we're leaning into really heavily with our partners and need to do even more of with groups like the Met Council who have such great data capacity. Your team has amazing capacity that I will say, cities don't really know and understand the number of times cities say to me, oh no, Met Council doesn't have that. And I'm able to say, yes, they do. Hold on. Let me connect you. They do. They can get that for you. Or Wilder doesn't have that. Yes, they do. Hold on. Let me connect you to the right person. They can get that for you. Or the Fed doesn't have that. Yes, they do. Hold on. Let me connect you. That's a lot of our role is I don't have a data team. I got a team of people who are connectors to the people who have the data. And that's a big role that we play.
Thank you.
Okay, with that, Council, I think we're going to need to move on to our next presentation.
Can I just
Okay,
ask one quick
Councilmember Wolf.
question? With the council's work on equity, our definition has included ability as well. I didn't see any of that on your website. Do you track any measures, or does economic inclusion include disabled people within your organization?
So our focus is exclusively on racial economic inclusion. That said, intersectionality is important, and so we partner with and support any institution that has that intersectionality focus. We help. So all employers are focused on, for instance, ability and disability. Greater Metropolitan Workforce Council has it as an intentional, explicit focus, and so there we partner there. The center, however, is focused intentionally and exclusively in that space. So from a partnership standpoint, yes, we pull data. We're looking at that data on a constant basis, but our intentional focus and mission is on racial economic inclusion.
Okay. Thank you. I think you can see there's a high level of interest among the council members, and we are in the middle of goal setting. We're trying to get our goals set by October 1st, and so we're working hard on this, and then we have to work with metrics and all those kinds of things. And so I know we will be in touch, and the staff will be in touch, and council members, okay for people to email you directly and start to build that relationship, but we're really glad you're here, and thanks for a great presentation.
Thank you. I look forward to partnering.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good. Well, we have one more, and this is an exciting topic tonight, which is climate change, leadership that creates a pathway forward through action and collaboration. So Lisa, Eric, Sarah, and Jeff, welcome.
Good evening, council members. Thank you for bearing with us. I think we've had a really great presentation from Tawana and on that work. And kind of on the flip side, not flip side, but related is the climate work that we've been doing. Climate impacts across our region, a number of things, including our economy. Before we get started, though, maybe we'd all introduce ourselves. I'm Lisa Barajas, the Community Development Director, and I'm also the executive sponsor of our climate change work here at the Council.
Jeff Freeman, a Senior Project Coordinator at Metro Transit, working on energy and sustainability.
Sarah Smith of the Metropolitan Council Environmental Services, Sustainability Manager.
Eric Wycheck and Local Planning Assistance Senior Planner. I work in climate resilience, helping communities with their comprehensive plans.
Great.
Thank you. So we'll get started. I'm going to give an introduction here and get us started, and then turn the presentation over to our subject matter experts here to really get us going on where we've been in climate. We've been talking about this over the course of this year with you and getting you up to speed on what we've been working on and what the state of climate is in Minnesota. And now we want to fill you in on where we're at as far as the council's work. And really, I think, timely with your goal setting to really help you set the stage, are really here to set the stage for you and help you develop those strategies to follow on your climate conversations. So really base level, we know that Minnesota's climate is changing. We're already experiencing those impacts today. We know that we're warmer and wetter in ways that we were not expecting, but we know that's happening. We know that climate change affects everybody. It's not just an impact that's felt in that one place where it's flooded, but it's also felt when you travel across the region, your ability to travel, your ability to get on the bus without getting wet up to your knees, your ability to actually get to your job on a daily basis. And I know our friends in Scott County have seen that be a case when we've had our bridges across the Minnesota River closed for extended periods of time. It is also our responsibility to act now, and we know we can, and we have been, and that's what we're going to talk about today and bring up to speed on what we have been doing. And as you will see from this presentation, we know that our efforts are making a difference, and we can do more. So we need the entire council and the region to work together to build an equity-focused, climate-resilient future, and we know that that will not only make this a more livable region for our residents going forward, also help support continued economic prosperity and continued stewardship of our public investments, both in our infrastructure and in the livability of our region. So today, like I mentioned, I'll talk about just a refresher on climate change in Minnesota. We're also going to remind folks of our policy direction that is rooted in Thrive MSP 2040 and our policy plans, get to some definitions and organization about how we've done our work around mitigation, adaptation, and resilience. And then, like I mentioned, give you a full breadth of the work. We're not going to go in too much detail. We know your time is short. We're at the end of our meetings today, but we also have done a lot of work, and there's so much detail that we know we are not doing all of it justice. So really giving you the breadth of the work that council staff have done over the last many years since Thrive's adoption, and then talk about next steps and integration with your goal setting work. So as many are aware, the scientists and International Panel on Climate Change published a report last year that highlighted the need to reduce global greenhouse gas emissions to keep global warming below 1.5 degrees Celsius to avert irreversible change in our climate and devastating impacts across the globe. To achieve this reduction, the world would need to cut global emissions by 50% within 10 years. While this news is challenging, there still is time for us and government to act. The council has a small but still a very important role in conserving energy, embracing renewables, and reducing our greenhouse gas emissions. The council works to meet the state emissions reduction goals, and the council can adopt its own goals and policies to more aggressively reduce emissions. In addition to our operational side, we also play a large role in working with others and supporting the work of local governments in their efforts to have an impact in the way that we both on reducing emissions and adapting to changes. This should look familiar to you. Earlier this year in June, state climatologist Kenny Blumenfeld presented how climate change affects Minnesota. This slide presents a summary of those effects. Trends indicate that the metro area is getting warmer and wetter. The trend is based on a series of data points over time that truly are statistically significant and truly indicate a trend that we know is not going to stop anytime soon. By wetter, we know that we are having heavier precipitation events than we've seen in the past. Kenny talked about some of those major storm events. We're not talking about just 100 storm, but 500 storm events on a more frequent basis. So really flashier. And if you've watched the news recently, we know that we're in our top 10 of wettest years of all recorded climate history in Minnesota here just this year. And we're going to get snow this weekend, apparently. So one of these things have become a little more unpredictable than what we're used to have, than what our historical climate record has shown us. We know that we're warmer, and by warmer in Minnesota, it's not those hottest heat waves that people think about, hot days in the summertime, but really what we're thinking about is our overnight lows are warmer than they have been, and our winters are warmer than they have been. And that can have significant impacts in our urbanized environment, both for our natural environment and the ecology of those environments, but also in our urbanized environment with things like wintertime flooding, which we experienced just this spring during our so-called snow melt, but that happened really quickly. We know that we will continue to see seasonal and annual weather variations and these trends, but we'll still see things like cold snaps and long cold spells, and we'll still see droughts even as we get wetter over time. And we know we're not the only ones that are experiencing impacts. This is just a plethora or snapshot of what other places around the world and around the nation are experiencing. Our impacts are different in some ways than many areas. Wildfires aren't our issue, although we do see this in Anoka County with spring wildfires before we get rain in some years. Some events like on the far right in Copenhagen were what they called cloudbursts, major storm flash events that really blew out all of their transportation infrastructure for days at a time. What we may not be looking for from our regional or our national partners in this work is how they address things like a wildfire or sea level rise. What we can learn from them is how they work together to address those issues. These issues are cross-cutting, across divisions, across silos, and it really does take that sort of coordinated, integrated effort to make true lasting changes. It's not just an emergency management issue that we have to think about. It's all the way up to the top of how do we think about the investments we're making to begin with? What do we do with the investments we have on the ground today? And how do we ensure that what we're doing is creating a resilient future for everyone in our region? So just a reminder in our policy plans and Thrive MSP in 2014 and 2015 with our systems plans really sets the stage and direction of what council staff has been doing since then. So for the last 4 to 5 years. Thrive MSP defines sustainability as a key outcome, but our climate work isn't rooted just in sustainability while it's most explicit there, but also in livability and prosperity, and particularly around stewardship as being managers of significant regional assets and investments in this region. So a lot of the work that you'll see in front of us today is the work that we've started to do out of that policy direction in Thrive, which was really based upon, at that time when we got started in this work, was really on what is our role? How do we figure it out? What is our data? What does the data say about where our investments are, what the impacts are, and where the steps are going forward? So really about leading by example in our operations. Where can we make changes that are good economically for the council in the short term, but also in the long term? You heard Ed Petrie earlier talk about just LED investments in our buildings and how that rate of return on that investment was a 2 to 3 year period. Those are things that are both good in helping reduce our energy usage and our overall emissions, but also are good for our bottom line. So really leading by examples in our operations, and you'll hear more about that from the team up here, as well as on the planning side and working with our local government, other stakeholder partners, really working with them on helping to support the work that they're doing, because it doesn't take just the council. We can't solve this alone. We need everyone there to do that, and we can support those efforts. So before I turn it over to staff, I just wanted to give some kind of framing for the rest of our presentation. You're going to see on our slides these icons going through. These are cues about that show how each of our initiatives or projects either fit within that lead by example, in that collaborate with others, or work across divisions, and in many cases on all 3 of those pieces. So while it's not the main way that we're going to present the information, we wanted to show you how those fit within those overall policy buckets that are set in Thrive. And then just some definitions before we jump in. Our work is oriented in these buckets around mitigation, adaptation, and resilience. And these are terms that are both defined in Thrive and broadly within across agencies and governments that do climate work. every day. So we're all talking about the same thing. So mitigation is really about strategies focused on minimizing our contributions to climate change. So really on the energy usage, on our greenhouse gas reduction strategies. Adaptation is really about addressing what's happening to us today, what we know was either on the ground today or will happen in short order, and how we change our policies and practices and our investments to adjust to the effects of what's already happening today. Resilience is really around strategies and projects that recognize the difficulty of predicting those impacts, but being able to weather them and to come back at least the same state that we were at before, if not better. So this is really adopting this this terminology is really adopting terminology from biological sciences around conservation biology and what it means to have a resilient population and resilient ecosystem, is being able to withstand those shocks and recover from them and get back to base level, if not better. So I'm going to turn it over to Sarah, who is going to take it from here.
Great, thanks, Lisa. So for the next part of this presentation, it's going to be divided among myself, Eric, and Jeff. And we're going to go through mitigation, adaptation, and resiliency in a little bit more detail, as well as providing some ideas around metrics that we look at the council, that we support in the region, and that the state is looking at. And then also diving in a little bit into what are some of the actual initiatives and actions that we've taken or are taking in each of these areas. So for each section, mitigation, adaptation, resiliency, you'll see we're going to start off with a table like this. And the purpose of this table is to help us dig into what is the topic that we're talking about, what is the time dimension, what is the level of action that has the greatest level of impact, who are the critical stakeholders, what are some of the metrics, and what are some of the actions that we can all take. And so for mitigation, again, this is minimizing contributions toward climate change. And so the time dimension is really thinking about what can we do now to have lasting and long-term impacts on our contributions or lessening our contributions. The level of action is at a large scale, so a national or international scale. That doesn't mean at a local level we don't impact or influence those levels of action, but the greatest impact is going to come at those higher levels of action. That's a policy setting and large implementation of reducing our emissions. And the critical stakeholders in this are energy and transportation sectors, as well as the large industries. A large contributor, and I'll get to this on the next slide where I start to show you some data, a large contributor of greenhouse gas emissions is from the energy sector. While the energy sector is the one that is emitting the emissions, we're all responsible or play a role in the demand for energy. So we have an opportunity to influence and change the direction of the energy sector and the transportation sector by the choices that we make in our operations and our day-to-day lives. Some of the metrics that you might look at over time and thinking about mitigation and how we're doing, or how a state or region is doing, is looking at what are the emissions for the region, state, or for a particular business area. So for example, this is a graphic that is taken from the Pollution Control Agency website. It's data that they provide and how they present the data on their website. And it's looking at by sector, and this is a common way of looking at greenhouse gas emissions and inventory, what the state of Minnesota emissions look like. As you've heard earlier and in previous presentations, the Metropolitan Council staff and the Community Development Department is working on a regional inventory. So to get a sense of this is the state, and then we'll be able to look at what the region contributes to this. And for reference, our operations here within the Metropolitan Council, we make up aspects of 4 of the different categories: transportation, electricity generation, commercial, and waste. And our total emissions make up about less than 1% of the total statewide emissions. Again, that doesn't mean that we don't have an opportunity to influence and support through partnerships and collaboration and working with the utilities to have a greater impact beyond just the impact that our operations may have on the emissions. Within environmental services, where we have seen our greatest area of greatest impact, or where we can have the greatest influence in our operations, is looking at our energy usage. So first, we can look at how much of our energy usage is dependent upon fossil fuel-based energy sources. So we've looked into ways of providing process and building efficiencies to reduce our consumption of energy, reduce our reliance on those fossil fuel-based energy sources. We've also looked for and found opportunities and implemented them where we can recover heat from processes within our wastewater treatment operations. So we have heat that we can recover, we have steam that we can recover, we have gas that we can recover. And recovering those sources can lead to, we can utilize those sources for energy to heat and provide electricity to our facilities, which also reduces our reliance on those fossil fuel-based energy sources.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment. So, council members, one thing is we're going to be setting sort of the goals. This is right in line with what we're doing, right? And if you're on that particular group, you want to look hard at this. I'm going to be sending you a memo tomorrow that you can change groups if you want to. So if you're interested in this and you didn't get a chance to weigh in on this, that's going to be a possibility too. So as we move forward, so just want to get out there that this is extremely practical as we go into our second session. So thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So looking at energy recovery that we can utilize, that what would be wasted energy from these processes, to utilize that energy for heating and cooling and electricity usage at our facilities. We've also worked to electrify our fleet. We have a relatively small non-revenue fleet, so fleet that is utilized by our staff, but we have plans for continuing to expand our electric fleet based on the technology that's available to us, and with the expansion of the vehicles themselves, also expanding the charging stations at our different facilities to be able to provide the flexibility and usage of those vehicles. So not only do we look at our operations and our influence that we can have and our impact that we can have within our operations, we also look at what our regional partnerships, tools, and resources that we've developed to support the region in our joint effort in mitigating for climate change. And a couple of examples there, we in recent years partnered and played a leadership role in this partnership that provided the opportunity for us and 30 other local governments to participate in community solar gardens. So advancing solar energy throughout the region by supporting the community solar garden program, which was primarily an Xcel Energy program that allowed us and other customers of the utility to purchase subscriptions into different solar arrays around the metropolitan area. And in this case, we have cited some community solar gardens on our property for which we subscribe to, but we've also subscribed to community solar gardens that are not located on our property. And through this partnership, we were able to use our resources and together with the resources of other communities to do a public competitive solicitation to partner or to have 5 different solar vendors offering us many different community solar garden options. And these would be options that wouldn't normally have been available to the local government had they not been able to partner with the other governments because of the time and resources it takes to find and negotiate the different contracts. We've also worked in recent years on a green partnership with Xcel Energy, and this does 2 main things, and my colleagues in transit will talk more about the transit side of this partnership. But the renewable energy aspect of this partnership is a commitment from the council to purchase 100% of our Xcel Energy from renewable sources. So working proactively and aggressively with Xcel Energy to purchase what we do purchase through Xcel as a renewable energy source. Right now, before the Public Utilities Commission, there is a Renewable Connect program, which we have played a large part. We've contributed quite a bit to the direction of the program, and right now it is under review by the Public Utilities Commission, who will ultimately approve the program. And Xcel Energy is also working on procuring what will be the renewable energy that would support this program. So we're now kind of in a holding pattern, waiting to see what the program ultimately, what the terms of the program is, and as well as the price of the renewable energy. And once we get all those numbers back and that information back, we'll be able to assess whether or not it meets our commitments to our customers when it comes to what we pay for energy and what the impact would be to our ratepayers. But assuming it meets our criteria, it is something that we're excited to participate in. This first tranche would not be 100% of our energy, but we have said that we would be committed to our energy usage at Metro, so that energy usage which is supplied by the Xcel Energy utility, we could participate in this Renewable Energy Connect program, assuming it meets our criteria.
Thank you, Sarah. At Metro Transit a while back, we looked at a slide and it talked about mitigation as something that's today forward. At Transit, we've been looking at mitigation as for the last 15 years, primarily as an economic driver, looking at opportunities to reduce energy consumption. We started back in the early 2005 era with working with Xcel on energy conservation opportunities, doing audits, looking at our facilities, looking at the opportunities. I remember our first projects were relamping fluorescent lights with fluorescent lights. And now we're about 80% through the process of relamping all of the lights within all of our operations to LED. Mitigation really is reducing consumption. And for us, it's started with our building optimization. We did an HVAC analysis. If you remember back to the buses that may have been around in the early 80s, exhaust was down low. Now the exhaust is up high. In our garages, we took the air from down low, brought it in up high, tried to work against science and try to get hot air to the floor. In 2009, 10, 11, we went through a process where we reversed those flows, took the exhaust off the top, brought the hot air in the bottom, added some sensors to improve air quality. And now instead of using something called a prescriptive ventilation rate, which is a certain number of cubic feet per minute per square foot, we're driving our ventilation off of the air quality within the facility, which means if it's exhausted, we have to replace it with air. And when it's being replaced, it has to be heated in the wintertime. Those projects themselves have returned a large number of dollars to us. Ed Petrie talked about our capital program, how we investment in energy enhancements. I think by the end of 2020, we'll have put about $15 million into the program, either fully committed or spent. By the end of 2021, we'll have probably saved $30 million. So this program has a lot of value to us. On our slide here, you can see on the very far left side, that is actually a screenshot of our building automation system. It's what we use to maintain temperature and airflow within our buildings. It's available online. We're heading up to a point in time where we're going to have to invest again in the equipment and technology because it's a lot like computers. The computer you bought in 2007 at home is no longer functioning because Windows has had like 7 upgrades. None of them have been any better than the first one you had, but they're new. Again, we have a picture of our own electric bus here. I went up to Ed. I actually have one of our buses at our charging stations. I know he was stealing my thunder, so I got him back. But then again, we have 133 hybrid buses. At one time, we had 134. I think something bad happened to one, and we just don't talk about that. We have our 8 battery electric buses that we all are aware of where we sit with that right now. Ed talked about 8 more electric buses coming in the next CIP. We also have a number of electric vehicles. We're moving towards 10. We have in different flavors. We're doing different things with them. We have them for pool cars, some 2006 Nissan Leafs. They get about 100 miles in the summer, about 70 miles in the winter, if you drive with blue fingers and knuckles. But they serve us well for right around town. They're not as great for the longer trips up to Big Lake and places like that. We're now expanding into some Chevy Bolts. I think we'll have 4 of them serving us in construction. I think and the Chevy Bolts, they're killing us on that. We've also expanded into a plug-in hybrid Mitsubishi Outlander, which is a new vehicle for us. It gets about 25 miles on the battery. We're using that as a pool vehicle, but we also have some with our street ops people. We recognize the fact that our street ops folks that are out there watching the buses do their thing, there to help with the detours and help customers, that some of those vehicles don't travel that very much in a day. Sometimes they travel a lot, but the ability to have the first 25 miles be electric and then switch over to internal combustion engine seems very appealing. We also have renewable energy. We've got 122 kW of behind the meter, which is solar that's on a rooftop of a building, or in our one case, where it's on the side of the 610 and Noble parking ramp. That was a novel opportunity for us to get around a city requirement where they were looking to have us put some facade on there instead of investing in some fancy metal that everybody said, wow, that looks cool. We actually put blue solar panels on there, and we're making electricity. We also have 7.6 megawatts of community solar collaborative. ES was, as Sarah mentioned, was a leader in that. What we found with our community solar garden subscriptions is that we are saving about 12% on over what we would on a normal electric utility. It's not a lot of money, but given where it comes from and the fact that it is cheaper, it's worked out very well for us. And Eric?
Thank you very much, Chef. Now, let's take a break, do a little stretching. No, so when it comes to mitigation and community development, we focus on primarily two areas, which would be our solar work and our work on the Metro Climate Stats project. I'll first speak to the 3 bullet points at the top, which are our solar work. And that work is led by Cameron Bailey, who's a solar advisor here at the council and senior planner. First of all, the Solar Energy Innovation Network engages, it researches the viability and potential efficiency gains of marrying solar panel electricity production with electric vehicle electricity consumption to maximize their effectiveness for the electric grid. So a lot of this work around solar is about partnering on different projects and providing resources. The Minnesota Solar Pathways Analysis Project uses statewide cross-sector collaboration to find least risk, best value strategies for Minnesota to achieve its solar energy goals of 10% by 2030. And that'd be about enough power for half of the households in the metro area. The project is currently developing a solar deployment strategy to calculate the economic benefits and market incentives created by different solar portfolios. And the Minnesota Brightfields initiative is really interesting. It's a cross-sector collective of local, regional, and national solar energy professionals working together to support the goals of Minnesota Solar Pathways Project by supporting local governments wanting to see development of solar on their community-closed landfills. So we're working quite closely with the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, and the Environmental Quality Board is leading a study on this very project on a statewide basis, and we were really instrumental in helping secure those funds through the legislature. And then SolSmart, Regional Organization Designation. We are the first metropolitan planning organization in the nation to have a gold designation for our SolSmart program. And that's not only because of what we're doing operationally, but it's also because of the technical resources we're providing to local communities. And I'll kind of touch on that more in a future slide, so I won't spend too much time on that. Now, for the Metro Climate Stats, some of you will have seen this project presented at a May Committee of the Whole meeting, and I think Mauricio Leon, senior researcher, is actually in the audience. Yep, so he's just there. He can speak to this project much better than I can, but I'm just going to touch on some of the high points. The project is primarily developing a climate action plan, developing climate action planning resources for communities that will be comprised of specific web-based products, and they'll be released in the coming months. One such tool is a greenhouse gas inventory for communities, and there's a kind of beta image of that on the left. This is a tool for tracking the emissions of a community. For example, how much carbon the city of Bloomington produces from energy consumption, transportation, solid waste, wastewater, and more. This tool is also available on the county and the regional scale. The second product is a greenhouse gas scenario planning tool, which is shown on the right. And that tool will help communities forecast their greenhouse gas emissions into the future decades and plan different strategies around land use and transportation to reduce these emissions. Just jump on to the next slide. So when it comes to adaptation, what is adaptation? First of all, we have our table here, which you've seen for mitigation. Adaptation really is reducing the impacts that we're currently experiencing from climate change, but also making sure that we can deal with those impacts as they occur in the future. We need to adapt our current systems to the changing climate And these adaptations are occurring now, and they're going to continue to occur as time goes on. So policy and implementation strategies are highly dependent on the impacts an area is experiencing. So the actions and policies are going to be more localized. They're going to be more industry specific to meet the operational and regional development needs. So whereas mitigation we saw is implemented more on a national or international scale, this level of action is much more local. So we are seeing a lot more local governments, municipalities, townships, tribes, looking at adaptation strategies alongside ourselves. One metric for adaptation can be the consideration of where to locate a business, looking at vulnerabilities of populations to different climate hazards or vulnerabilities to assets. Sample actions can include infrastructure protection plans and procedures. So again, making sure that pipes last longer, that they're located in the right place to deal with any future impacts. So some metrics around adaptation. For adaptation, there are a couple metrics the Council has developed and shared with regional partners to adjust to the changing climate. One is our climate vulnerability assessment, and this analysis helps the Council address vulnerabilities of its own operations and maintenance, while helping our customers and stakeholders identify where vulnerabilities may exist for them. So as the saying goes, what gets measured gets managed. So if we can determine where these vulnerabilities are going to occur in our regional systems, we'll better be able to plan for them, to plan for these impacts. One other area of measuring for adaptation is our inflow and infiltration mitigation program, which has been successful at keeping our wastewater flows constant or decreasing despite the increase in precipitation and population growth in our region. The Council also tracks, does a lot of water quality and temperature measuring in the region's streams and rivers, and that's another area where we can have a good sense of how the climate might be changing and how best to improve water quality in our region. It is worth mentioning, I don't have a slide showing this, but it's worth mentioning that the Council received the 2018 Minnesota Climate Adaptation Partnership Award as an institution. This is a highly competitive award that recognizes leadership in adapting to climate change at the state level. I'll pass it back over to Sarah.
Okay. So in the area of environmental services, the biggest impact to our operations would be the precipitation levels that we're seeing and the precipitation changes that we're seeing as the climate is changing. So what do we do to adapt to those changes so that we can continually provide the level of service that we are committed to providing to our customers and the region, despite the fact that we have these precipitation events? But we have flood mitigation or management plans. If you remember the spring of this past spring, where we had some pretty significant flooding and the impacts that it would have to our roadways and to how we operate at our plants, that we were able to maintain our level of operation and our commitment to our customers despite the fact that the flooding right around the plants was occurring. And given the location of all of our plants near major waterways, the likelihood of flooding to occur is great. If the river is going to overflow and flood, then it is likely to have an impact on our area, our facility, which our flood management plans take into consideration when we are planning for different types of precipitation events. There are other things that we can do as well, and Eric made reference to our I&I mitigation program, and that's minimizing the amount of clear water that gets into our system so that when we're treating wastewater at the plants, we're treating wastewater coming through that system and not treating the clear water that's coming in through precipitation, dealing with the precipitation events through stormwater best management practices so that we are treating the stormwater as needed, but not in our wastewater operations. We do the I&I program through our Interceptor Renewal Program, which Janine and Ned mentioned in the capital program budgeting presentation you heard earlier this evening, that we're spending quite a bit of time and attention to our interceptors to make sure that they are in good condition, at least good condition. And we are also implementing at our sites stormwater best management practices so that the water that is the precipitation that's falling from the sky is infiltrating at our facilities and not running off and carrying contaminants to our waterways in the region. So we're helping to protect the quality of our region's waterways and water bodies through best management practices in the stormwater area. In the way of partnerships and tools that we offer the region, in acknowledging that inflow and infiltration is not just into our system, but the pipes that connect to our interceptor system. And so providing I&I grants to communities to help support the mitigation of that clear water into our system, as well as providing stormwater grants, which you also heard about earlier this evening, our stormwater grant program, to facilitate and support best management practices throughout the region.
Adaptation at Metro Transit is really, for the most part, been using our knowledge and experience and collaboration with others to improve policy, procedure, and practice. On this slide, we're seeing, talked about a couple of these facilities, the new Minneapolis bus garage. We rejected bids earlier tonight, and we'll be going out for new bids. But we've put a lot of work into that facility. We're able to use the recently completed Metro Transit Police facility. Actually, we're just about completed. We're waiting for a few little punch list items to get signed off and move forward. But in that process, we put out something in advance called an owner's projects requirement document. It went out to the design teams. We talked about things that we didn't want to have to discuss later on in the design. We just put it right out on the table and said, you need to do this, 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 and this, and this, because these are important to us. Whether it's the flush valves on a toilet to the type of heating and ventilation system, we were very active in proactive ownership to get into the design and work with our design team right up front to say, here's some things we need you to do. What that yields for us is it gives us a very solid idea of what kind of performance we can expect energy-wise in our building. The new police station, when it's fully up and running, we expect to have a energy intensity, or what's known as an energy use intensity, EUI, based on kBTU per square foot. A building like this is probably in the 80s or the 90s, maybe 100. That building over there, the new police station, we're targeting in the mid-30s. So it is really an innovative building as far as energy use. It outperforms most of the buildings that have been constructed recently in that part of Minneapolis in the North Loop. Eric's work in the climate vulnerability assessment, they did the blue spot analysis. We looked at that as part of our route planning. Where do we run bus routes? What is the risk of a 500-year rain? As Lisa mentioned earlier today, how does that relate into detour planning when you obviously can't move a bus off of Lyndale 3 blocks over? That probably doesn't make sense. But if there's a place on Lyndale that is going to flood, what does that detour look like? We can know in advance of what a 500-year rain will do to us and how we can make a change, how we can be quick and responsive, be nimble to our customers, and seem seamless. We've talked about Xcel Energy, the electric bus, our energy agreement with them, our green partnership. Working together, we've gained an incredible amount of knowledge and understanding. Putting in the infrastructure for the electric buses into the garages is not simple. There's a lot of capacity within the grid and the distribution system that Xcel has to think about and how it fits in, what other customers are affected by us taking a large chunk of electricity off the grid at that point. How does it all come together? That work in there has been not only productive for that facility, but it also will be something that we can use again and again as we look to expand electric buses into the other service garages.
So as mentioned earlier, not only as a council system metric, the climate vulnerability assessment also produced a suite of tools for local communities to use. So those tools can help identify vulnerabilities related to localized flooding, but also extreme heat. We've also produced 2 interactive story maps, which help frame the challenges and the climate hazards that we're looking at in our region. And those are really geared towards more of a lay audience or I would say a community that's just starting to look at these issues. So it frames the problem, it provides some solutions as well. So when we talk about resilience, that can be kind of a harder definition to pin down. The way I think about resilience is kind of as in the hazard mitigation world of how to not only prepare for a hazard, but also how do you respond. And there are two types of stresses that we look at when we talk about resilience. So we have what are termed acute stresses and chronic stresses. So an acute stress would be like the North Minneapolis tornado of 2011 that nobody could have predicted or no one was coming, but that's acute because it happened very fast. And it tore right through the neighborhood. And, some would argue that in terms of the response around that, the bounce back effect, or how do you thrive after a stress like that, some would say that the community's still working on that. They're still missing a lot of their urban canopy. There's still a lot of damage to the buildings from that event. And a chronic stress would what we'd call like a slow moving impact, sometimes imperceptible. So a good example of that might be our crumbling infrastructure. Could be undersized stormwater conveyance systems, or it could be emerald ash borer, which is really causing a lot of damage to our ash tree population in the region. We stand to lose about 3 to 5 million trees. That's going to be huge. That's a slow-moving impact. So when we talk about resilience, it's not just about bouncing back, but like Lisa said earlier, it's really about how do we thrive in spite of the chronic stresses, the acute stresses, and the impacts associated with them. So we need to, resilience is really about flexibility, and not just flexibility in our planning. It's also, in my view, it's about being nimble as an organization. So, we need to talk more about transformational change. How do we work differently when we have a moving target? So we have impacts that are changing. We have climate change that's changing in ways that we don't really fully understand, and we can't really project. It's very challenging. But how do we put together structures in our organization to allow for quick change within our organization to deal with these issues? So one thing we've been doing for measuring resilience, and I'm very proud of this image, but I also think we can do better. Right now we have about 137 comprehensive plans in as of last week, and nearly 38% of them have a standalone resilience chapter or integrated resilience component within them. We've kind of broken this out into different buckets of things that relate to resilience or climate change planning. But while 38% is not 100%, we have to think about where we started from at the beginning of this process, which was about 14%. So, through providing technical resources to communities and through outreach and providing a lot of training, this percentage has obviously gone up a bit since then. So I think, like I said, coordinating and partnering with communities has been key in this. And, I'd like to think that we're only going to get better as we go.
Okay, so in environmental services, we not only operate and maintain the wastewater system in the region, we also contribute and participate in planning activities for water resources and water supply. And within our division, the work that we do within our division is that we work to integrate our planning activities so that we're considering water as it flows through all of the system, not just the natural system, but also the infrastructure system that has been built within the region and other regions. And how do we plan for those in such a way that, knowing that the impacts that we might decide, the choices that we might decide as a region at our local levels in water supply planning, how that may or may not impact the wastewater decisions then that we have to make in our infrastructure and treatment there. And so how do we think about that as an entire, all from start to finish, kind of the whole flow of the water drop in the natural and the man-made flows. We also are taking, rather than just implementing best management practices in the way of stormwater at our facilities in kind of case study ways or in piloting different things, we are now also moving toward doing some intentional planning and coordinated planning at each of our facilities in the way of landscape design and stormwater practices. And once those plans are completed, we have every intention to also implement those plans. And that's also thinking about not just the plants that we plant and where we plant those plants, but the impact that those plants may or may not have on pollinators and other parts of the ecosystem, which are there to also support the greater region and how resilient we are to climate change. We also think about how our infrastructure, our processes, our equipment, we look at the life cycle of those processes, and so we figure out where we can prioritize what needs upgrades, what needs maintenance, and when, so that we are ready to operate regardless of the environment around us. We also look at permit restrictions. As you know, permits, as we continue to pollute our waterways and the air, permits regulations become tighter, or as we find out about new pollutants and the contribution of those new pollutants in our air and waterways, permit restrictions get stronger. And so as we're thinking about what those changes may be in our permit requirements, what are some ways to work not just with what's coming out of our pipes, but also with the greater system around us, and looking at where it starts, where the pollutant might be coming from, and how do we think about where is the best place to really deal with this situation to minimize the amount of pollutants going into our waterways or the air, and how do we partner together to figure out where is the economically and systematically the best place to be lessening the impact or the contribution that then leads to impact. And lastly, we're also looking at facility upgrades. So at our Metro plant, we have a phase 2 electrical distribution project, which is making sure and improving and upgrading our electric distribution and metering at the plants, again, helping us to be able to ensure the services that we provide at our facilities, regardless of the changing environment around us. And we do that through improvements and upgrades. Excuse me. In the way of partnerships, tools, and resources, the Metro groundwater model is a good example of how we know the characteristics of the aquifers in the region, and we've modeled those. We can then test different precipitation or temperature models, inputs, to see what that would do to the recharge of the aquifers, which then is information that water suppliers in the region can use when they're thinking about what is the long-term sustainability of their water sources as the climate is changing. We've also participated and led stormwater and wastewater reuse studies. We may not be at a point in the region or the state where reuse is economically the best option or that it's the leading option, but we realize that we may get there someday, and so we should be aware of what the costs and implications are of reusing stormwater or wastewater, and knowing when and where that threshold might be where it becomes the option that we should be looking at. And then we also provide water conservation grants. Just knowing, again, if you're thinking about our aquifers and our waterways where we are pulling our water from, supporting our local governments that own and operate the municipal water supply systems in helping to encourage residents like ourselves to use less water, and doing that through grant programs to support water conservation.
Transportation and services, Metro Transit resilience. We look at facility design for resiliency. Designing and building buildings to better withstand an unknown future is paramount to us getting the most bang for our buck. When we use state funding, we're involved with a state code, SB 2030, the state building code. It gets us into, we talked about the OPR a little bit, but it also gets us into a process where there's a formalized process, an enhanced energy design assistance program, sponsored through Excel and something called Wilden, used to be the White Group, through SB 2030, the state, the B3 office. We work together to look at options that we can put into buildings and start cost comparing. Does an extra 4 inches of roof insulation make sense? And you go, 52-year payback, maybe not, because we'll change the roof in 30. So we start to do some of these things and make intelligent decisions. Where do we get the big bang for our buck? We also start to look into stormwater and facility landscaping. How can we do a better job? Eric talked about chronic situations. The slow-moving chloride plume, as chloride seeps closer and closer into our aquifers. We're finding high levels of salt usage. We're looking at our facilities, especially our public facilities. How can we design them in a manner that we can make snow removal easier, require less chloride on the ground? What other options exist? Chloride is cheap, too cheap. It's too easy to use, but it causes us a great problem, and we haven't yet really begin to pay for that problem that we've created for ourselves. ADA accessibility. Earlier in the capital budget, you talked about Metro Mobility. I don't know if there's anything more resilient than we can do than make our bus stops more ADA accessible and get somebody to have the ability to be able to go on a mass transit whenever they feel they want to go and not have to use Metro Mobility. You think of it as it's almost like a freedom besides just being able to go someplace and control your own life. It's like, hey, I can just get to my bus stop, I can get on my bus and I can go, I can come back, and I'm not waiting for Metro Mobility and I'm not tied to another service, another person. We also have our Better Bus Stops program. I think you've heard about that at various presentations in the past. Again, another effort to improve the quality of the user's experience on mass transit. We know that transit in itself in this region it is a slight improvement over a single occupancy vehicle. As we improve densities, that improvement gets better and better all the time. How we get people on our service is key. Make it easy, make it fast, make it on time and efficient. We start talking about facility system redundancy as well. Primary and secondary utility feeds. It's a critical item. We talked about Excel coming in with our electric bus in there, but even on our new facilities. One option was if the power goes out, you fire up a great big generator and you repower the building. Unfortunately, that great big generator hopefully only works like it's off 99.9% of the time. Some of the time it's on doing testing, and very rarely is it on doing what you bought it for. It's a large investment. It's not a very efficient way environmentally or economically to make electricity. So we look at having the utility bring in a second feed. We look at the economics of it. Power goes out on one feed, the automatic transfer switch is over on another feed. Rarely do we have situations where we lose two substations within the city at the same time. It's a very rare occurrence. We also talked about in the capital budget discussion, transit asset management database. They've been working on this for a number of years to have an extremely inclusive inventory. The depth of what we've included in that inventory now is mind-boggling from things we've had in the past, but it really dovetails into the idea that if we have something and we know where it is, we know when we bought it, we know how often it should be repaired, it makes it a lot easier for us to keep it in the condition that we need it to be, so it can give it our level best when it becomes a situation when it's stressed in a flood or hot weather or whatever. That system's going to work. Because it really, at the end of the day, it really, for us, the resiliency is about the economic and human resource efficiency. Are we able to do what we want to do? Can we recover quickly? Can we move forward and get things done?
And now back to community development. As I mentioned earlier, the local planning assistance team was providing a lot of resources in the comprehensive planning process to communities to help with their planning for resilience. And we've got a lot of those in the comp plans now, a lot of the strategies or the goals and objectives and strategies. One other piece of that was being asked to go out and actually facilitate community resilience workshops in partnership with watershed districts and other entities. And we ran a series of those in 2017 and 2018, and that was really a great experience just to be on the ground working with small community groups to help them with their planning. And one of the things that really came out of those workshops was that when we plan for our most vulnerable residents, we're really planning for everybody. So people have to be at the center of this work, especially at the community scale. Oops. Oh, can I go back? Yeah, I can. So just to jump back to the SolSmart technical assistance, I did say that we did achieve the gold designation from the Solar Foundation, and that's primarily due to the fact that we We expanded solar access across the region by offering resources and technical assistance on solar planning, market development, and finance. And we've advised 76 communities on solar, including 26 municipalities that have achieved or are on the pathway to achieving Soul Smart designation. So that went from, I think, just a very few to a lot. And that's in the course of just a couple of years here. Finally, we have been partnering with academic institutions to do a lot of this work, and that's partly because we're a small team. And there are a few of us working on this, but we can benefit from partnering with academic institutions to help with some of the foundational research work. So one of our most long-established partnerships for the last 2 years has been with the University of St. Thomas. We've also worked a lot with the U of M as well. But the St. Thomas partnership is actually between the council and St. Thomas, but also between Metro Transit and St. Thomas. So we have 2 MOUs with St. Thomas. We've run many projects through their classes, and all of these projects have to do with sustainability in one form or another. That could be producing council resources, but also resources for communities.
So I'll round out our presentation after hearing everything that you've heard today. We know it's a lot to take in, but as we mentioned earlier, really timely with your conversations around your goal and strategy setting. Eric, could you skip to the next slide? Thanks. Before we get into those next steps, I just want to acknowledge and recognize the work that our climate change and emissions team does across the council. The staff in front of you today are just a small set of that group, but really leading that group in that cross-divisional work. It is, as I mentioned, climate change and emissions reductions is a cross-cutting issue, is an issue that we can address just by our transit work or just by our environmental services work, but it takes actually all of us across all of our divisions to do that work. And in this particular team, it's an interdivisional team with representation from across the council, where the staff get the benefit of both really understanding of what each of the divisions is responsible for and how they're integrating that into their everyday work, but also providing insight and asking questions of like, why would you do it like that? Why not like this? And providing that kind of outside perspective to some of those projects, but also really thinking about and understanding how and where work is being done across the council and building that shared understanding of what do our policy documents say and how are we going to accomplish those things going forward and how can we do those things even better. Maybe we came up with those ideas in our own heads, in our own divisions, but there are maybe better ways of actually accomplishing that going forward. The other thing I'd also like to say is that, as staff have mentioned, it's a small group, but it is a group that has a significant impact. And really, the more that we can do, we're looking for that next step. So if you could step to that next slide, thanks. So as we mentioned, you've had these conversations already around goal setting, including one around climate, and that discussion coming up next week. And while I know that this is a lot of information, there's a lot of directions that you can go in with climate work, both on our operations side, but also where do we want to go and how do we want to set the stage for future planning, regional planning and policy work for the next development guide. And I know it seems like it's really far away, but the adoption of our next development guide is in 6 years. Our last one was just 4 years ago. And when we look at our last guide and all of the things that we said we were going to do, we've checked off a lot of those boxes already. And we know we don't want to wait 6 years to get to what do we do next. We know that there's a lot of work that can be done today. And that's where we're looking for your direction. Not tonight, but to think about it and thinking about where we have your conversation next week, and then following up from there, if it's of interest to you as council members to dig in further and to get more detailed direction, in addition to the strategies that you have for the next 3.5 years for your term, but how that extends beyond that as well. As we get some of our regional planning conversations for the next round of planning underway, because it does take us several years to actually develop a plan, a lot of that research and a lot of that initial work can start happening today. So what I have as an ask for you tonight to be thinking about is whether there's additional information that you would need to support your conversations, whether that's next week or ongoing, how we can provide that to you to support that conversation, and to think about how you might want to continue to curate this work going forward. So thank you, and I know we're late in the evening, and I really appreciate your time.
Well, thank you for a great presentation, and don't mistake our sort of tiredness for any lack of enthusiasm, because I think everybody really is intrigued with this area, and it's really, cutting edge as far as what's happening across the country. So great work that you're doing, and so we want to let you know how much we appreciate that. I was also going to say there is, as you know, climate is one of the governor's main strategic goals, so we will be working with other agencies. Ray Zarin is my designee in terms of the climate committee. And Sue Vento is EQB, and so we have a lot of people going deep in environment. Of course, Pete's a leader, and so we'll also continue to go to those meetings. I know you're the staff, Lisa, for that. We went to one last week, and both of us kind of came out of there going, "Wow!" I mean, there's so much to do, right? And so how we figure out our niche and all of that, or how we coordinate, I think is probably one of the biggest challenges. But we have we have several people on the list, and so we'll see what people think. Councilmember Sterner, then Lee.
All right. Thank you very much for your presentations, and this is really one of my passions going forward. So I just will bring up a couple questions because I know the hour's late, but at least I know where the resources are, where you guys are and everything. But a couple of things I was looking at is like the big picture and the cycle. So like we really at the corner of the market of methane gas. So I don't know if you consider using methane gas there, then having natural gas buses where we're just like doing a full circle, where we're kind of reducing two things at once on that, because it just seems like if we're already putting the gas part in, we use a part and we can put it in the buses, so we really cut out a lot of the loop and of the fossil fuels. So that's like one thing I'm looking at.
Councilmember Sterner, at two of our plants, we have digestion where we would have the methane gas. And at both plants, it's Blue Lake and Empire. And at Blue Lake, we use the methane to heat a dryer that dries the solids after it's been digested, which then feeds into a NEFCO, which is New England Fertilizer Company, that turns our digestates of the solids to digestate to fertilizer pellets. And so we are capturing and utilizing the methane gas in our own processes. The amount of methane gas that is being generated from that digestion, and given the location of where it is, it doesn't make it as feasible an option for fueling our buses, but it has come up in conversation. At Empire, we are working on a capital project, a solids improvement, where we'll have combined heat and power system there. So again, we will be capturing the methane gas and utilizing that for heating at the plant, as well as having backups with natural gas. So we work to utilize all of the methane that we are able to capture.
Okay. And then my other thing is like with the new bus garage and other buildings, every time we're doing a project, could they be like LEED certified or green building? So like anytime we have a chance, we're at the maximum capacity on what our buildings look like.
Madam Chair, Councilmember Sterner, go back to the CNG just for a second. We looked at CNG in a study 2012, 2013. I don't think any of the bus operations folks are here. At that time, we had 134 hybrid buses, and that was kind of an intermediate step. And the part of the determination was the move to CNG requires significant HVAC and changes within the garage operation due to the leak, the potential for a gas leak. Highly capital intensive. There are issues with this environment up here as far as the very cold weather. There's a bunch of different things there, and they just moved on beyond that as an intermediate step, thinking ahead that electrification is going to be the end position that you want to be. Hybrids were a logical intermediate step. Moving on to electrification is the end goal and where we're headed for that. So we looked away from that at that point in time and have focused waiting for the electric bus technology to develop, both as far as range, battery performance, size, all those things that make electric bus now something that we're entering into. We made a conscious decision to wait after that CNG study and say, no, we're going to wait till electric bus becomes the real deal. Let some other people be on the cutting edge or maybe the bleeding edge of technology, and then we'll come in when the time is right. As it relates to our new facilities, we design and build with an idea towards Lean and Green Council. The cost to certify is astronomical for what you get out of it. Nobody gives us points for marketing, it seems like. I would like that, get an attaboy here or there for, you've done really well, but we all know those things are expensive things to chase. And some of the things that they award points for aren't necessarily things we find to be that attractive. Sometimes when you're chasing certification, you're chasing points, and it's just, you go, well, maybe I don't want that point, but I need it. I'll put this in. And we've focused on cost-effective buildings, energy efficiency, making sure that, like the new police facility, if you've been in, you've seen the inside of it, it's like, oh, this is a really inviting facility. I find a lot of my colleagues who are in the other building seem to be over in the police area, in the commons area, doing their work and things like that. They just drift away from their cube because they find it a lot more relaxing, a lot easier to get their work done. So.
All right, thank you.
So, and then we have Councilmember Lee, Gonzalez, Lindstrom, Cummings. So Councilmember Lee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My first question is hypothetical. I know that, and then I have a comment. The Chinese have pneumatic robots making ammunitions. When are we going to get pneumatic robots? And my comment is, I really appreciate your work. I have no idea that we touch climate change in this many ways. And when we work to address and undo effects of climate change and renewable energy, it really affects the poorest among us, the most vulnerable, and disproportionately communities of color. We just saw a couple weeks ago Northern Meadows get kicked out of North Minneapolis. And before he ran for office, Paul Wellstone made a name for himself as a Carleton professor, fighting with poor white farmers in Rice and Goodhue counties, fighting power lines, fighting nuclear power companies down there. And so when we do this, we're not doing it. We're not doing it for certification. We should do it because it's the right thing.
Thank you. Councilmember Gonzalez.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a couple of questions. The first one is, and I'm going to pick up on the bus replacement presentation that we had, in which we were talking about the savings that we might have when moving from a 12 to a 14-year-old replacement span for our buses. What if, because of the effects of climate change, we have to replace the buses every 4 years or 5 years because the wear and tear, because they get rusty, because it's raining so much? Is there some way to quantify the effects of climate change on our operations at that detail level? And kind of the flip side of that is, thinking again on the buses of extending the lifespan from 12 to 14 years old, is there a trade-off? Because the buses from the future might have better gas mileage and less emissions. So should we factor that in on whether or not we should replace the buses after 10 years because they will have lower emissions, but that might have an impact on our budget? So are we thinking along those lines too?
Jeff.
Wow. Madam Chair, Councilmember Gonzalez. First of all, some of this gets out of my area, so I'll just kind of dance on the edge of it. Wash the buses. We wash our buses every night. One of the areas I think we can make some improvement on water conservation is maybe in the summer wash them a little less. But our equipment, whether it's our light rail vehicles or our buses, we have a strong commitment to state of good repair. Our vehicles are well maintained. I've been to other cities, and you go on their transit buses, and you're like, I think I'll stand, and I hope I get there. Our buses are well maintained, so I think there is a potential that, extreme climate change, but I think we're talking, by and large, we go through a cycle in Minnesota from minus 10 in the Twin Cities typically here to 100. So we're seeing a huge thermal shift on our buses, and I think that's probably more detrimental to the equipment, that large thermal shift, than a few more extra degrees or a little bit more water, because we do take care of our equipment. Now,
just to follow quickly, can we quantify that? Like, because of the stresses, we have to replace the equipment more often. If there's a dollar value to that, or is that too?
I don't know that you can quantify that. I think we end up moved the life out to the 10 from out to 14 years, as you look at that number, at some point in time, you look at the bus. They have great records. I mean, they send me information that's just 150 rows wide by 1,000 rows deep, and I'm like, I didn't need to know all this. I just want to know how far it went and how much gas it used. At some point, the vehicle there's a number that says this repair costs too much. It's going to get retired, and those are the kinds of numbers that they work with. I mean, they're very on top of that. Becomes a point, just like we do at home. That car is, next time it needs tires, we're not getting tires for it. It's going to get hauled away. So I think we do a great job there. Can you go back and repeat the second?
I would say too, on that 12 to 14, lifespan too. It's not like we're doing a wholesale change in 12 years or 14 years. That's a cycle of as that bus ages, and that's that next time then we'll replace that.
And let me add on to that. Part of this comes into the service plan. We're working on it. I think we're working on a new service plan. The service plan is key. Service plan will tell us where we're going to put service, and it talks about the number of buses required to meet the service plan plus spares. Some of the buses that get into that get long in tooth, they become state fair buses. But with that service plan, we know what we need to have out on the street. And again, 10 old buses might be, I think we have still some 2007 buses, a few. And there's a couple of them that and they've got numbers on them, and every once in a while I'll see one. I say, well, that's an old bus. I can just look at it. It's one of the few left. There might be 12 of those things sitting in State Fair at the pool, but these other two have outperformed. For whatever reason, they've been maintained well. They just didn't have any major issues. They're still in service. So I think that part of it's kind of hard to determine whether it's why a bus might leave service early and why another bus stays extra long. It's luck of the draw sometimes. Sometimes it might be who drove that bus for the first 5 years. I don't know.
Okay. Thank you, Councilmember Lindstrom.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, I want to jump on something that Lisa mentioned right at the end of her remarks, which is the interdivisional aspect. This is the first time, I believe, in 7-8 months that we've had this council, that we've had folks from every division, transit, environmental services, community development, up here making a presentation. So kudos on that. It's the exact approach that we need. And the other thing I wanted to hammer home to the council is that threaded throughout their whole presentation was strong partnerships with counties and cities, with local governments, whether it's straight out grants on like the grants we gave out earlier today on storm sewer, I&I, on clean water, but also a strong emphasis on technical assistance. Also, like the GHG scenario planning, the metro climate stats, those two things in particular, as cities develop their climate action plans or their comp plans in the future, those are going to be invaluable tools for cities to utilize for those plans. And a couple other things I just wanted to hammer home in terms of partnerships. The Brightfields Initiative, these are closed landfills, and there are closed landfills all across the metropolitan area. And closed landfills are terrible to put anything on. You can't put anything on a closed landfill, but there are people looking at putting solar panels on closed landfills. There's still some issues with that. There's a lot of issues around that. It's not a clean-cut deal, but there's a lot of promise there, and we're leading the effort to see if that's a possibility in the future. SolSmart, 26 cities in the metropolitan area are SolSmart certified. That means they're using best practices on planning, zoning, and permitting. So when a business or a resident wants to get a solar panel on their roof or ground mount, they know exactly what to do to get that permit. They know exactly that the best practices are going to be followed. And last but not least, the Community Solar Garden Collaborative. And this was a program a couple of years ago when community solar gardens were brand new. Legislature said that community solar gardens can come into Minnesota. And cities were being approached, counties were being approached to subscribe to CSGs, which is great. But they're 25-year agreements, and there were just a whole host of questions about whether or not these are a good deal for the city to subscribe to. And Hennepin County and Ramsey County and the Met Council all had similar questions, and they came together and said, hey, why don't we come together and figure out these questions together? And oh, by the way, why don't we invite 20 small communities to join with us? And the Met Council led the procurement effort, didn't have to do it, but did it, which resulted in, I'll just give you this data point and wrap up. At that time, a few years ago, there was 30 megawatts of solar in Minnesota. Grand total, from border to border, 30 megawatts. That's not very much when you look at all of the energy consumption in the state. So through this process, we doubled it. We got communities to subscribe to 30 megawatts, roughly, of CSG subscriptions. So just our one effort alone, I think we can say we helped in doubling the amount of solar in Minnesota, now to the point where we're at a gigawatt. That's 1,000 megawatts of solar, thanks to CSGs and many other initiatives. So just hammering, not even a question, just kind of driving home a few points, only to say that these are models that we should be encouraging and supporting, we as a council, in the future, starting with next week or our next planning session, thinking about, okay, how can we keep the train going here?
And you get to lead that process, so that'll be along with staff together, but partner with staff. So I think that's exciting, and I think you're in the right job as environment chair or ES.
I'm passionate about it too. If you can't tell.
And bringing us home on third base, almost ready to come home, is Molly Cummings.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay.
I'll keep it really brief. Great presentation, really interesting. Thank you for that. I'm curious, there's so many tools and so many resources available within the website and within the Met Council, and it's all very exciting. And of course, the suggestion has been made, could the Met Council lead an effort partnering with other agencies to come up with a template? Not every community is large enough to have its own department or even an advisory committee or a community action for developing community action plan. And, I think it was 31 communities have some sort of resiliency built into their comp plans. Take all of that, it doesn't have to be real detail, the detail is out there and available, but to come up with an overview, because oftentimes I think, if a community is thinking, gee, we ought to look into solar, you look into solar. But if a community is thinking, well, what might we be able to do? There are clearly a million things, and some of them are small and relatively easy and relatively inexpensive to other things that are, much greater. But I think it would be great, and I'm wondering if there might be an opportunity or a conversation going on where we could be the leaders in that as well.
Madam Chair, Council Member, yes, thank you for your question. I know Eric and I both on that email string with you. As we're thinking about moving into our next phase of technical assistance, as communities are adopting their comprehensive plans and moving into implementation, that's certainly something that we can consider. We have a lot of we would like to pull and see what people are looking for and see what that breadth of work is and then develop our work plans around that, especially in partnership with communities who might want to test and model some things, seeing what's already out there, and also working with our partners across the region. We work with a lot of nonprofit and university partners, as Eric was mentioning. So certainly you see a lot of value in partnership there and bringing how to think about doing that, especially pairing that with our greenhouse gas emission scenario planning tool, and how those two pieces can work together is a great opportunity.
Thank you.
Thanks. Anything else? All right, thank you very much. Great presentation. Council, would you want to, does anybody have a report they would like to talk about? No? Or we can do them next time, I think, at this point. Okay, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Motion to adjourn. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Hearing ayes, all, we are adjourned.